Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. We see a man saying he won, while we see a game with a clear screen. The man is excited he finally beat the game, and we see his chatters are excited too. We learn the game is called Protect the Empire, a tower defense and dungeon offense hybrid game. And after 10 years, he's been the only person to win the game. He talks to his chat, and tells them no matter how difficult a game is, he will beat it. The man is a streamer named Retro Taku who specializes in high difficulty retro games. He receives a chatter mentioning the death of the saint, and Retro Taku mentions how the viewers bonded with the characters, and wished everyone would live through the final battle, but everyone except the main character Lucas, died. But his goal wasn't a no-death run, but just to complete it. He mentions how even after the game was beaten, Lucas just stands still over the final boss's corpse, on top of the corpses of monsters, and allies alike. He says even though it's a game, Lucas looks so lonely standing there. It shows the end screen, and one of the chatters says, the dev should reward him because he beat the game when everyone else complained about the difficulty of the game. Taku says he doesn't need anything like that, it's fine because he had fun. And the chatters mock him for faking being modest. Taku mentions how their website's already been taken down, and there's no sequel to the game. So there's no way they'd reach out to him. But he receives a notification from the developer of the game, and he is surprised. All of his chatters are surprised, and the developer says first, you have my gratitude, because he thought nobody would succeed, but I'm relieved after seeing you beat the game, and I'm happy there's still hope for us. This confuses Taku, and he wonders if they're making a sequel. The developer then says, you've proven your skills, so come to this place and help us. Taku wonders if this is a scam, because there's no way the developer would have come to his stream in the first place, and decides to kick the man out of his stream. He says Mr. so-called developer, but is interrupted by his screen distorting, and everything goes blurry for Taku. He wonders what's happening and falls unconscious, wondering if played for too long. The screen thanks him for playing, and it shows some giant things crashing, creating a loud noise. This wakes up Taku, and he screams, wondering what the noise was. He sees in front of him a wall has been melted by some acid, and he screams, wondering what is going on. The debris begins to fall, and he cowers on the floor. He's overwhelmed by the smell of gunpowder, and is shocked when a cannon fires in front of him. He looks around and sees a flag, and an army of soldiers, and that he's on top of a castle wall. After seeing all of this, he wonders what's going on again, and wonders if he's in the middle of a war. One of the soldiers notices he's awake, and they rush to him, saying, Your Majesty, are you alright? This scares Taku, and he crawls backward, thinking it's an enemy, and yelling to stay back. The soldier drops his weapon and gets on his hands and knees, apologizing, and asking for him to spare his life. Taku wonders what the hell is wrong with the man, and as he tells him to calm down, he sees a giant acid ball being hurled at him. It lands on the man, knocking Taku onto the floor. He struggles to lift himself up, and when Taku looks over, he sees people being melted and screaming. Another soldier yells out, saying the stormtroopers are coming close, and to prevent them from climbing up. One of the men instantly dies, and we see his impaled corpse get flung over the wall. The man's arm gets sent flying, and lands in front of Taku, splashing him in blood, which forces the situation to sink in as reality. He witnesses more soldiers being impaled, their lifeless bodies just drop to the floor. And Taku wonders what's going on beyond the wall, and he sees a spider monster climb over and begins to crawl at him. Some soldiers notice this and try to help, but are instantly killed, paralyzing Taku with fear. He wonders if it's a dream as the spider approaches him, because the situation makes no sense to him. The monster slashes down at him, and Taku thinks dying like this doesn't make any sense. But a man with blonde hair appears, and tells him, Your Highness, being in denial is such a boring response. And we see the man pulls out his sword, and imbues it with aura, and instantly kills the spider. He asks Taku if he's okay, and asks if he's hurt. Taku says he looks familiar, and recognizes him as Lucas. Lucas says it seems he's hurt his head, but he's glad because he finally called him by his name, and mentions how he's never called him by his name before. Taku wonders if it's really Lucas, and realizes that would mean he's inside of the game he just beat while streaming. As he looks at the battlefield, he realizes he is fucked, because of how difficult the game is. He sees an entire army of spiders swarming at him, and he is utterly shocked. It shows the spiders shooting acid balls bombarding the walls, and Taku wonders why he entered the game. Lucas grabs Taku and tells him the enemies are called the Black Spider Army, and that they don't move after sunset. And even though the front wall is about to collapse, they just need to hold on until then. Taku wonders why Lucas is protecting him, and wonders who he is in-game. It cuts to sunset, and we see soldiers being carried out, and treated. Lucas begins to talk to Taku as he overlooks the spiders' corpses beneath him, and Taku asks him when and where they are currently. Lucas tells him the year, and that they are at Fortress City, also known as the front base of Crossroad. Taku remembers what tomorrow will be, as it's a familiar date and location. And reveals that it's actually the tutorial of the game and that he must be called Ash. He asks Lucas if that's his name, and once he says yes, he becomes scared. Taku explains that he's the third crown prince of the Empire, and the worst commander, and that in the tutorial, he met the worst ending. His full name is Ash Bonehatter Everblack. Taku explains again that he's the only person to have cleared the hardest difficulty, which combines Hell and Sage modes together. Sage mode just autosaves, so you can't go back. And that the tutorial is an impossible stage, that was made to never be beaten, and that the story starts with Lucas escaping alone. And the Black Spider Army appears later in the game, so how is he expected to kill them at the start? He slaps himself and says that he's cleared it before, and if he uses all of his knowledge, there has to be a way, but after hyping himself up, he realizes he's fucked. He can see from the stage info screen that there are thousands of spiders, and they are all high level, and even the wall's durability is low now. The only weapon he can use currently is a cannon, and he begins to think of a solution. He mentions if it's Sage mode, he can't load, so he has to find the best way possible every time. And since he's been playing the game, he's realized there's always an option to survive. And he looks through the info for something to use. He runs out of his room screaming for Lucas, and tells him to call for his escort troop. Lucas asks why, and he tells him he's found a way to break through the situation. We see him sitting down, and begins talking to everyone. He recognizes all of their faces, but he's never seen them live. There's Lily, Ken, and Damien. He asks why Damien is curled up, and they explain he lost a friend. Taku remembers that from the start, Damien was debuffed, and even if he's an important healer, he wasn't useful. He changes the topic and tells everyone what their roles are. He explains Lily is a fire mage, but he gives her the position of tank. This confuses her, and he tells Ken, who is actually a tank, that he's going to infiltrate the enemy camp, and tells Damien he'll be their sniper, and he orders Lucas to maintain the front line. Ken yells and asks if he's taking this seriously, but he understands that it sounds like a crazy plan. But explains that this stage is impossible to clear with normal means, but he has to use crazy means. He glares at Ken and asks if he's disobeying him, the son of the Emperor, and the Supreme Commander. Everyone looks tense, and Ken is visibly scared. Taku stands up and pulls out his blade, stabbing Lily in the shoulder. And mentions how while he's in Ash's body, he has to be crazier. Ken thinks to himself that the prince is a complete lunatic, and there's no way they can trust him. We see the knife inside of Lily's shoulder begin to catch flame, and everyone is shocked. And Taku explains that the tutorial characters have a hidden specialty that contrasts with their role, because it was put in as a joke. Taku asks Lily if she was cut by metal before by some goblins, and after that, she gained fiery skin. Taku explains that it changes the body to flames to avoid physical attacks, and as long as she has mana, she can avoid attacks, and asks her if he's wrong. He explains how in the game, you can't use her quality, but this isn't a game. And for an impossible stage, there's no choice but for him to cheat. And he curses whoever sent him here. He apologizes to Lily for stabbing her, and she asks how he knew about it. He tells her it isn't important, and he calls Ken's name out. And he explains Ken was a thief when he was younger, and Ken asks how he knew. Taku says how he knows isn't important, and it's about what he can do because of it. Taku explains that he can conceal himself whenever he wants, and nobody will notice him. Ken stays silent, and Taku threatens him with the knife, and Ken says he can do it. He puts the knife down and approaches Damien. He explains he's the most important piece, and asks Damien about his eyes, and explains that's why he can remember his friend's death so well. Damien recalls his friend's death, and begins to cry. Asking why he was brought here, asking if there was some noble goal, or if their lives are nothing but entertainment. Taku tells him to resent him, but his friend gave his life to save him, and asks if he's just going to waste it, and that he needs to take revenge. Kill the spider, then take revenge on Ash. He asks Damien if he wants to kill the spiders, and he says yes, and he asks if he wants to kill him too, and Damien says yes. Taku says good, and promises if he gets out of this alive, he'll die by his hands. Lucas yells, and Taku says if the plan fails, they all die anyway, but he promises to die by Damien's hands, and gives him his word, so at least for tomorrow, just follow his orders. Taku explains that he'll use Damien's resentment toward him as fuel. And he tells them he won't make excuses, and due to his judgment, the army is on the brink of annihilation, but if they stick to his plans, they can drive the monsters out and will win. So just this once, follow and trust him. And we see them all looking determined. It cuts to the next day, and they are atop the walls preparing for the Black Spider army. The soldiers bang the drums to notify everyone, and we see Taku beside a cannon. And the spider army begins to rush in, and he explains the plan. While the members buy time, he'll find the queen, and after that, they'll shoot her with the mana cannon. But the problem is the location. She orders the army from far away, so it's not visible to normal people, and he wonders if it's possible. And he opens a window while grinning, saying it is. We see a giant blue barrier extend outward from the castle, and it's revealed to be Ash's unique skill. It's the ability to view the area in minimap form. And he was surprised by the weak stats, but is happy he's got this skill at least. He looks at the mini-map to find where the boss is, but is surprised it isn't on the map. It cuts to Taku giving Ken stamina potions, and Ken preparing to leave the gate. And we see Lily scared, waiting inside of her spot. And Lucas commanding the troops. He sees Taku's oh shit face, and mistakes it as him being ready, so he orders the soldiers to fire. We see them kill some spiders, and Lucas gives him a thumbs up. Taku focuses up to try to find the boss, and realizes she has to be in the back. He sees the rear group on the minimap, and asks Damien if he can see them. He asks if he can spot the queen, and Damien focuses and describes the queen. Taku gets the cannon in position, and he orders Damien to hold the cannon. Damien is scared, but Taku tells him it's okay to miss. And that he'll take responsibility. Taku says that all Damien has to do is pull the trigger and avenge his friend. Damien pulls the lever, and we see the cannon charge up and fire. We see a massive beam of mana launch from the cannon, and we see the ball fly over the enemy army toward the rear. And we see a giant explosion, and the soldiers say the target was hit. They compliment Damien, and we learn Damien has a trait that means he can never miss. Taku notices the monsters are still moving, and he grabs a monocular, and he spots the queen being protected by the spiders. We see her let out a scream, and the spiders begin to change their tactic, and begin to zerg where Lily is. It cuts to Ken hiding behind a tree with only one stamina potion left, and the spider army is running past him, and he wonders if he should run away. It cuts back to Damien saying it's been a direct hit, and the queen is still alive after taking a cannon shot. Taku explains how the spider queen is generally pretty weak individually, but the tutorial stage queen is different. He has no information about her, and wonders if she has an unkillable status. One of the soldiers yells about how the cannon is reaching its limit, so it only has a few shots left, 3 to be exact. This heavily worries Taku, and he understands killing it with 3 shots isn't possible. And that Damien's eyes are being strained, and wonders if Damien will last. One of the soldiers yells that a demolisher is coming, and we see a giant spider crab rushing toward the already damaged wall. Taku yells for everyone to focus it, but it has no effect, and the wall gets smashed through by Chungus. We see the rest of the spiders run through after the demolisher, and Lucas and Taku give everyone their orders. Taku tells them they have to kill the queen, and we see Damien launch another attack, visibly straining his eyes. It cuts to Lucas holding his ground against the spider army, saying they must defend Taku. And Taku begins to get frightened as he watches the soldiers die, and the death count begins to climb. He wasn't aware when he was playing it as a game, but actually hearing the screams of the soldiers makes the reality sink in. He begins to panic and cannot think of a way out. We see Ken screaming to draw the spider's attention, and he runs away while they follow him. He hides behind a rock and activates his stealth, but he doesn't have the health required for it, and is surrounded by the spiders. We see them tear him to pieces. F in the comments for Ken. Taku realizes his lapse of judgment is what cost Ken his life. Not only Ken, but everyone else is losing their lives because of him. And how in game he always used sacrifices to get what he needed, because that's how the game is. But now he understands the weight of his actions. And he angrily yells at the spiders, but he knows they won't stop because of a scream. He sees Lucas killing one of the giant spiders, and Taku realizes that the only way to stop the monsters is by killing them. One of the soldiers tells him the fourth shot is ready, and Taku asks Damien if he's ready, and we see Damien is bleeding from his eyes, but says yes. They shoot the shot, and we watch it hurl toward the queen, hitting her directly as she screams, but it isn't enough to kill her. They fall to their knees, realizing the attacks aren't working, and because they only have one shot left. Taku wonders if this is truly the end, even though the cannon is about to break, and the front line is broken. Damien can't open his eyes, and he wonders if there's any hope. One of the soldiers yells out that she's definitely been damaged, and he admires the scout for being loyal to his role. And the scout says one more shot can kill it, but an acid rock hits the scout. Lucas screams out for Taku, and we see him falling from the tower because it's been broken. He blacks out, but is woken up by a light. This light is revealed to be Lucas blocking debris for him. Lucas asks if he's okay, and begins to puke up blood. Lucas asks if he remembers, and says it's been 20 years since then. But Taku doesn't know what he's talking about because he's not really Ash. Lucas mentions how on his first day as his bodyguard, he spoke to him, and said he can't become the emperor, but he will become the greatest man in the world. So Lucas must become the best knight in the world. Lucas mentions that those words deeply motivated him, and he tells Taku he believes in him. And he falls under the weight of the rubble. Taku pulls his unconscious body out, and tells him to hang on, because he's the hero, so he cannot afford to die here. He begins to analyze the situation, and he sees Damien and the other soldiers beside the cannon. And he wonders how they are still alive, and where the spiders are. He hears Lily calling for him. As she holds back the spiders, she tells him it isn't over yet, and we see she is impaled by the spiders. Taku yells out to her, and she says she can't hold out for much longer. She says soon, the monsters will break through, and we don't have time, so hurry. She says don't make my death worthless. Taku yells out for them to prepare the next shot, but one of the soldiers says that the cannon has surpassed its limit. And if it shoots, then it will explode. Taku says it's better for them to roll the dice even if they die in flames. The soldier asks how he plans to aim because they can't see outside, and that the cannon stand is gone. Taku says they'll hold the cannon with their hands, and there's no need to aim, they just need Damien to shoot. Taku approaches Damien, and tells him this is the last time he needs to shoot, and to please push himself once more. Damien says no matter what he does, nothing changes, and asks what the point is. Taku says if they hit it again, it will die, and Damien says that's not what he meant. Even if they kill the queen, then what changes? Because the world always takes things from him, and that he wants to stop. He doesn't want to live like this. Taku interrupts him by yelling his name, asking if he thinks the world is unreasonable, and even if he overcomes an obstacle, would he still be living in hell? Damien says yes, and Taku grabs him by his collar, yelling at him for saying obvious things. And that nothing goes his way either, but that's life. And asks if he's just going to sit and wait to die. And that they have to keep fighting until they die. And that he plans to struggle and fight until the end. He tells Damien if he wants to die so badly, then to kill himself, but if he's too much of a coward, then to become his trigger. He tells him to stop looking for his dead friend, and the only thing he needs to work for is commander, and that he's his chess piece, his key, and that's all he needs him to be. Taku activates his commander skill, and gives Damien an order to blast the monster's face off. Damien says he'll do it, and one of the soldiers says the cannon is loaded. But there's no way to cool the barrel down. Taku tells him to move, and says he'll hold the cannon. The soldier tells him that it's too hot, and it'll be way worse than an average burn. Taku says it's better to die that way. And asks Damien if he's ready. Damien says he can't see or feel his hands, and Taku reassures him it's okay. We see the cannon begin to heat up, and Taku begins to scream in pain from the heat of the cannon. We see him hold it up, and the soldiers begin to help him by grabbing onto the cannon. They all lift it up toward a demolisher, and Taku yells out for Damien. We see Damien's eyes begin to bleed again, and he's ordered to shoot, so he pulls the lever. We see the cannon begin to charge with mana, and it fires off a massive blast of mana. We see the beam propel the ball, and Taku just keeps repeating for it to hit, as he begins to pass out. Taku says it's an impossible task, they had to shoot at an enemy they cannot see, and there's no way it would hit. But we see the ball curve in the air, because it's ignoring the factors that limited the shot, including all of the monsters in the army. Because the shot's target is predetermined. It hits directly with the Spider Queen's face, only leaving a massive explosion behind. Taku begins to remember his first chatter in his stream, and we see he was happy to receive a chat, but didn't remember what he responded with. He opens his eyes, screaming, and we see him bandaged up, surprised he's alive. Lily tells him to rest more because the burn is deep and will take time to heal. She tells him he slept for 4 days, and she thought he wasn't going to wake up. He's happy when he understands he survived, and she explains the last shot killed the queen, and the army stopped moving instantly. And that they've won. He looks out his window seeing the soldiers moving the dead, and burning spider corpses. Lily explains the injuries he suffered, and that even after he gets healed, he'll still have scars. And he says scars are a cheaper price to pay than losing his life, and he asks Lily how she is, and notices she's in a wheelchair. She explains she ran out of mana, and a spider scratched her back, but now she can't move her lower body. She tells him not to worry, and she's just thankful that she's alive. And she explains the only survivors are 9 people in total, and Taku is visibly upset, and wonders if there was another way, a tactic that he didn't think of for everyone to live. Lily comforts him by telling him he isn't a god, and that there was no way to save everyone. Taku explains from the start he's the one who dragged the soldiers here, and she says that nobody expected the monsters to move in hordes, because they haven't for decades. And he shouldn't be so harsh on himself. Lucas barges into the room, while crying, he yells about how happy he is. He asks him if he's hurt, and that he can bring Damien over. Taku asks if Lucas is okay, and Lucas says his main strength is being tough. Lucas holds up a manifest for all of the soldiers who died, and says there are many he couldn't find the remains of, but they've recovered the ones they could find. Taku asks where they gathered the remains, and says that he'll go see him. On his way there, he meets Damien, and is surprised that Damien was healing everyone after what happened, and tells him if he wants, he'll give him the money to retire, and that he can do what he wishes now. Damien mentions how Taku called him his trigger, and Damien says he wants to know the origins of the monster, and why his friend died. So he asks to follow Taku's path. Taku says okay, and to pay respect to the dead, they needed a priest. We see them holding a funeral for the deceased. Taku acknowledges there wasn't a better strategy, and that he chose a plan and executed it. That this is his result, and he will carry the consequences. Taku tells Lucas, after the funeral is over, to recover the remains and transfer them to an empty field in the west part of the crossroad, and to bury them there. He plans to build a cemetery where the memorial facility was in the game. Taku says that every year on the last day of February will be a day they spend honoring their sacrifices. Taku tells Lucas he won't fail twice, and it's time to go back to their headquarters. It cuts to 3 days after, and we see they have a caravan heading toward the main camp. We see Taku inside one of the carriages, extremely bored, but we see he has a job selection available. Taku mentions how after level 5, you get to choose a job. We see his stats have barely gone up, but the interesting thing is that he can choose any job in the game. But one of the classes is one that he's never seen before, and he wonders if it's a hidden class that's a prize for clearing the hardest difficulty. He mentions his skill is useless in the start, and that it's risky to choose a job he doesn't know about. Lucas interrupts him and says they are close to Crossroad, and Taku looks out the carriage window to see a giant fortress wall. He explains it's at the south end of the world, and it's to stop monsters from emerging from the southern area called Black Lake. And it used to be a significant area, but now instead of soldiers, it's run by mercenaries, old soldiers, rookies, and people who've failed in society. And mercenaries were hired regardless of skill level, because the Empire just needed a meat shield. But after the constant development of commercial buildings, the area has caused people to refer to the fortress as Fortress City. We see Taku's carriage go down the main city street, but he realizes the atmosphere is horrible. He understands that after so many people died, they're going to view him poorly, but he's prepared something for this. The residents see a cart full of magic gems, and Taku explains how, right now, their trust in him is 0, but he knows how to get them to like him. And that is by abusing money, to buy their trust. They arrive at the Lord's Manor, and Taku is surprised by how big the house is. One of the attendants bursts out of the door. While yelling, he runs up to Taku and says he was very worried about him. Taku explains the man is named Ader, and that he's an NPC that manages the city, and handles administrative tasks. They head inside, and Ader says he's prepared the bath and dinner for him. Taku tells Lucas to go rest, and Ader guides him to the bath. Ader says once he's in the water, his fatigue will wash away. Taku thanks him, and says he can go rest, but Ader tells him he is incredible, and calls him Retro Taku. Ader says it was beyond his imagination that he'd be able to clear the tutorial. Taku gets angry, and Ader reveals himself to be the director of the game. Taku punches him. Taku is angry because Ader is the one who brought him here, and Ader immediately begins to apologize by saying the world needs him. But is interrupted by Taku jumping at him, and it cuts to Ader with his hands in the air apologizing. Taku asks why he brought him here. Ader explains that there's a true ending that nobody has reached, and that he's reset the world countless times trying to reach that ending, but he's never been able to get the one he's wanted. And that he's changed the world's form to that of a game, so people from other worlds could try. But still, even with this, nobody was able to reach the true ending. He says even though Taku didn't finish the ending he wanted, he was still able to accomplish something nobody else could. And he concluded that Taku would have the greatest chance, so that's why he brought him here. Taku begins to yell at him, because he kidnapped him and put him in the tutorial of all places. Ader says it was a bug, but if he achieves the true ending, he will fulfill one wish for Taku. Taku says, "What in the Dragon Ball?" Ader says he's akin to a god in this world, so it's obvious when Taku returns to his world, he'll give him a gift. Taku asks if it can be anything, like 10 billion, and Ader says he can do way more than that. Taku says that it's enticing, because there's one wish he really wants to see succeed. Ader mentions that he knows there's a wish Taku wants, one that he thought was impossible. Taku realizes now Ader brought him here, knowing who he was, and what he regrets. Ader says he'll fulfill the wish, as long as that wish lives on in Taku's heart, he can fulfill the wish. Taku says if he has this power, why doesn't he just use it to solve this? Ader explains there are restrictions, and in this world, he's a normal human. Taku asks what happens if he dies here, and Ader says he just dies, and life is a one-coin game. And that he could send him back to Earth right now if he wanted, and his first plan was to bring him here and ask first, but there was an issue. He tells him between choosing for a chance at getting his wish granted, or returning and live peacefully. Taku says normally, he'd have gone back instantly, but two things are stopping him. One is the desire for his wish, and the second was confidence. He cleared the game's hardest mode already, so clearing it one more time is nothing. He agrees to staying, and he asks Ader to support him. He tells Ader to sell all the gems by tomorrow, but Ader says he can't, and Taku tells him to listen to him. Ader says he understands, but asks what he's doing with the money. Taku goes to the mercenary guild for gacha, and decides to start light with 100 pulls. Taku kicks the door open, and people yell at him, but he yells back. He asks if they want to die, and people begin to recognize him as the lunatic prince. Taku explains the mercenary guild is where you go to pull characters, and their impact varies with rank. He looks around for anyone glowing, and spots an old lady smoking at the bar. He's excited to see an SR, he sits down asking what her name is. She says her name is Jupiter, and he recognizes her as the lightning sorcerer. He questions where her uniform is from, and she says it's an old model from their empire. She explains that she was the captain of the 2nd Sorcerer Squadron, and, since retiring, has been living as a mercenary. She asks him why he's there, and says he's there to hire some mercenaries. She asks if he's there to buy bait that'll die in his place, and says the rumors of their battle have already spread here, and it's true everyone there is a low life. They don't want to be thrown away by a newbie commander. He says he understands, but they are there to sell their lives anyways, and that her statement is weird, even though her career history is flashy. She was fired because she stole military funds, and how she was caught smuggling goods too and dishonorably discharged. Yet she's still proudly wearing her uniform, and calls her shameless. Taku explains how she's corrupt to her core, but her combat ability is outstanding. Even though she's more like a pirate than a soldier, she's still the lightning sorcerer. Jupiter says even if it didn't end well, she still has pride as a soldier of the Empire, but Taku interrupts her by asking how much. She doesn't answer, and he asks how much does it cost to make her a hunting dog. She says it would cost at least 100,000, and Taku interrupts her by saying 200,000. Even though it's a high price to pay, he's the prince, and he just sold all the gems. And that if he had the chance to buy an SR rank, he'd pay any price. Taku tells everyone he'll pay twice their original salary, and to come to the empty field west of Crossroad this evening. He then leaves and goes to the church. We see the saint has healed him, and that she's an R-rank healer. And that he can recruit her later, but that's not why he's there today. He pulls out a sack of gold, and we see the saintess has brought everyone who is free, and they head out. It cuts to the field west of Crossroad, and they are holding a more proper funeral for the fallen soldiers, and in the city, death is common, so this is rare for people to see, and that they've given the soldiers' families compensation, which has spread around the town. Taku explains that it's a show, but it's reasonable, because their fighting needs to be known as a mission of humanity, and Taku introduces himself to everyone, and he says everyone will die. Every week new graves will be made, and their deaths are more expensive than their survival. Taku explains how half of his fees have already been spent for compensation, and that's why he'll do his best to keep everyone alive. His speech ends, and he wonders what everyone thought of it. He doesn't care what they think of him, but he will prove his point in the future. After the funeral, he goes to the backyard of the mansion, and it shows Taku and Lucas standing there, and Taku activates a teleport gate. The rocks form a portal, and when Lucas asks what it is, Taku says it's a gate to the enemy base. Taku restates the game name, and brings up the dungeon offense part, how when the monsters aren't attacking Crossroad, you're meant to explore the dungeon under the lake, and it's called free exploration. And this swapping is the basics of the game. Taku explains how this is a very good start. Sure, it was rough, but now he has a cheat character like Damien, an SR mage, and a lot of money. Taku explains the rules to Lucas, and how they are scouting the enemy. Lucas easily agrees and says he's ready, and Taku is just confused, and thinks it's weird that Lucas isn't asking any questions. Taku asks if he has anything to ask him, and Lucas says he has no questions. He's his sword and shield, and only follows his orders. Taku asks if he's ready to enter, and they go in. They arrive at the lake, and we learn that the Black Lake is the source of the monsters, and is a hell that creates nightmares. They see bubbles form in the lake, and it splits open, and we see ghastly armors begin to crawl out of the floor. Taku calls them living armor, and Taku explains that it didn't matter who he got for stage 1. Out of all of the different monster types, the only one he wanted to avoid was these guys. And he is annoyed by his luck. The enemy screen updates, and we learn there are 1,000 of them. As Taku looks at the army of living armor, he says he's fucked. Taku explains that he reset the game 741 times, for many different reasons. But one main reason was any time he would get living armor early. Living armor is just armor with specters inside of them, and thus, are extremely resistant to physical attack. And they become easier to fight later on when you have more equipment. They head back, and Taku begins yelling for Ader. Taku asks him what the state of the military power is, and Ader says there are only 500 soldiers. Ader explains they can't hire any more from the city, and Taku says to branch out to other cities and offer double their salary, and to ask the Imperial Palace for reinforcements too. Ader asks if it's okay to do that, and Taku explains how, later on, there will be a bad event because they are asking the Imperial Palace for help. Taku tells him it's okay, just to ask them, and to call for carpenters, alchemists, etc., or rather just draft them. Ader says it'll cause an issue, and Taku gets angry and tells him the city is about to fall, and to just bring them all. Taku goes back to his room, and explains the difficulty level isn't normal right now, and we see him select beginner commander as his occupation. The window pops some confetti and congratulates him, and Taku begins to feel a tightness in his chest, and learns he has received a 50% debuff in stat gain. Taku looks dumbfounded, and screams. He grabs the window and continues yelling at it, and then sees a lot of traits appear and wonders what they are. He learns that just by standing on the battlefield, he will buff the soldiers, and that he can form party synergies, and for a gamer like himself, this is the perfect occupation. The next day he asks Ader to explain where everyone is, and Ader says nobody answered, but he brought the leaders in a hurry. We see them tied up, and Taku says this is just surprise adoption. The leaders begin to yell, and Taku asks if they want to die, and asks where they think they are, and don't they know who he is? He says as the Lord, they hurt his feelings. They apologize, and afterward negotiations ran smoothly. Taku offers them a percentage of the magic gems, and some other stuff and asks if it's a good deal. They agree to the deal. Taku tells everyone about the living armor, and they all share a shocked expression. Taku tells them he'll give them all their orders. Lucas will be the commander of the military, and Lily tries to get out by saying she's in a wheelchair, and Taku says she won't be at the front lines. Jupiter asks if she does well, will she get paid more? And we learn she has this trait in game too. Taku says, of course. And she's assigned as the leader of the detached force. Ader gives Damien a crossbow, and he's assigned the position of sniper again. Taku asks Damien where his glasses are, and Damien explains he only wore them because he wanted to worsen his eyesight, and now his eyes are needed, so he's not wearing them anymore. Ader makes a joke saying he's relieved there's not another glasses character. Taku tells him to shut up. After the meeting ended, it cuts to Taku at the wall, and the union leaders explain that the wall is in poor condition. Taku asks Ader why he didn't take care of the wall, and Ader explains there wasn't enough money, and due to no monsters, the city lord decreased their budget. Taku tells the union leaders it doesn't matter how much it costs, but to repair and reinforce the wall so it will last. He heads to the carpenter's workshop, and orders them to make walls, and the man says that the monsters will easily break them. Taku explains they aren't to block the monsters, and to just do as he says and make the walls tall and sturdy, just make walls. In awe of his beautiful words, they are speechless. He tells them to get started. Over the next 2 days, preparations continued smoothly for everyone. It cuts to the day of the stage, and one of the soldiers spots the armor coming toward them. They beat the drums to alert everyone, and we see a massive army running toward the walls. Taku yells and says don't be afraid, they are small fry. But instantly, in his head says they aren't, and are the worst army to handle in the first half of the game. Taku yells that the soldiers are the strongest part of the empire, and then double takes in his head again, saying they are just a ragtag group. And continues saying the magic is well prepared, and the equipment is in good condition. Again double takes just to flame it all again. He continues yelling to the soldiers, bluffing that it'll be an easy win, and tonight they'll be toasting for their victory. Taku stares at the armor, and we see a giant storm forming above them, and he says it's up to Jupiter, and it shows she's ready to farm some kills. Taku explains all monsters have one goal, to kill the human in front of them. If there aren't any obstacles, they'll move to the closest human, and this makes it obvious to predict how they'll move. So traps work well. We see a bunch of the enemies falling into a pit, after Jupiter baiting them. And we see lightning form in the sky, and Jupiter begins to hold a yellow lightning ball in her hands. We see throw the giant ball down into the trench, and giant lightning strikes begin to spread between the mobs. Jupiter yells at them to learn respect, and we see blue lightning form around her, and she throws it down into the pit and fries the armor. Taku is pleased by Jupiter's skill, and even if she killed 50, there are 1,000 of them. Taku yells for her to retreat, and we see her leading the army back to the main wall. Taku yells it's going as planned, and to just listen to what he says to do. We see Jupiter and her squad run past the wooden walls. We see the soldiers begin to follow and are in the middle of the wooden walls. Taku looks pleased, and says now it's their turn. And wonders if they'll avoid or destroy the walls, and their choice is obviously going to be just killing the human in front of them. They begin to bottleneck through the walls, and Taku explains that he set the walls up specifically to form a bottleneck, and orders his men to shoot. We see the cannons fire from the wall, and cannonballs begin to rain onto the enemies. We see explosions from the impacts, and parts of the armor begin to fly around, and it's making small dents in the army's size. Taku explains that this is called the kill zone, and yells for everyone to continue firing. Damien says, if it keeps going like this won't it be enough? Taku says no, and we see some of the enemies begin to form a shield wall. Taku knew things wouldn't be this easy, and prepared in advance. He calls for Lily, and she activates a gravity field artifact, and we see a giant purple sphere form around the shield wall and forces them to their knees. Taku orders Lucas to get the ballistas fired, and we see the giant arrows shoot toward the enemies, and we see them piercing their shields and armor easily. Taku says the plan is going as intended, and one of the soldiers come up yelling that some of the enemies have gone around the walls, and we see some of the army flooding out from the side of the walls. Taku yells out to Jupiter, and tells her to take care of the enemies on the right side of the wall. She heads out, and we see she starts blasting. Taku tells Damien it's his turn, and to shoot the enemies on the left side. We see Damien's eyes glow, and he shoots his crossbow, instantly killing one of the enemies. Taku recaps the kill zone, and the right and left sides. Taku watches the kill count climb, and is happy things are going well, but notices that the specters inside of the armor are flying into the sky. We see them forming a giant blue orb in the air, and once the kill count hits 500. We see a face form in the sky, and Taku explains that it's the Spectre Knight, and it's the boss of the enemy army. Taku explains that this is why the enemies are so rough, because in the second phase, once all the mobs are dead, and wonders why it's appeared even though the enemies are still alive. The boss hasn't moved at all, nor done anything, besides hovering. Taku explains that this is reality, and just the boss's presence is making the soldiers panic. That they are all afraid of facing a giant being, and just the appearance of the boss has weakened the front line, and not only the humans will be scared. It shows Jupiter being bucked off her horse, and she hits her head and is bleeding. The enemies begin to approach her. Jupiter's squad makes a formation around her. Lucas tells Taku they need to turn the cannons toward Jupiter to support her, and Taku tells him no. That if they lose the kill zone, more enemies will leak out. And to focus on restoring the kill zone, and he apologizes, telling Jupiter to hold on. It cuts to Jupiter waking up, and she sees her squad defending her, and when one of the squad members tells her they just need to wait for a rescue squad, he is attacked, but he dodges and hits the Spectre. Jupiter tries to tell him to run, and we see a spear pierce his chest, and when he turns around, he sees a crawling enemy was the one who stabbed him. The surrounding enemies take advantage of him, turning around and killing the man. This angers Jupiter, but she can't control her magic. She watches as another squad member is murdered in front of her eyes, and another squad member tries to run away, but an enemy throws a spear at him, and kills him too. This angers Jupiter even further, and she yells at them and casts a spell on the nearby enemies, frying some of them. But she comments how it was less than a quarter of her normal output. She yells for the last squad member to run away, and that he'll buy her time with magic, so just run away. The boy says he cannot run, and this is the best he can do. A mercenary's second rule of survival is to stay beside the sorcerer. The boy didn't kill the armor, but knocked them down. Damien offered support from the wall, but by the time Jupiter recovered enough magic power for a spell, the member was impaled by spears, and this sight heavily angered Jupiter. Jupiter lets out a scream, and we see lightning come from the sky, and then Jupiter atop the boy, with the armor dead beside him. She asks the boy what the first rule of survival is, and the boy says don't take a job that offers a suspicious amount of money. The boy cries out for his mother, and he dies. Jupiter says that his way of thinking is flawed, and if you want to be rich, or if you want fame, you can only take dangerous jobs that pay a lot. Jupiter begins dashing from armor to armor, destroying them, and says, stay far from the sorcerers. Because in the end, the sorcerer will take all of the credit, and if you really want to survive, then don't be a mercenary. Jupiter struggles to even light her cigar, and stands there as a horde of armor begins to charge her. She accepts it as her end. But here's a voice telling her to stay still, and we see Lucas charging his sword, while on his horse, killing the armor around Jupiter. This shocks her. It cuts back to Taku and Lucas's conversation, and Taku slaps a soldier and tells him to snap out of it. Don't get intimidated by the monster's size. Taku realizes his ability can cure the soldier's mental state, and he tells Lucas he'll take care of the kill zone, so Lucas will lead the rescue team to save Jupiter's party. Lucas agrees, and it cuts to him riding off while we hear Taku slapping more soldiers. It cuts back to Lucas telling Jupiter to hold on tight, and pulling her onto the horse. While they begin to ride away on the horse, the armor start throwing their spears toward them, but Lucas easily cuts them. Jupiter calls out to Lucas and asks if he's interested in seeing her granddaughter, and that she's a fine young woman. Lucas tells her if she has the energy to make jokes, she should recover her magic. She thinks when the prince is nearby, he's sweet, but when he's gone, Lucas is cold. Jupiter thanks him for saving her, and he says it's just Taku's orders, and he's sorry that he couldn't arrive sooner, while seeing the bodies of her squad members. Jupiter tells him to regret it after they kill the monsters, and that it's been a while since she's been this pissed off. We learn that Taku has restored the kill zone. Taku regrets having lost 4 hero characters, and says he was too confident in his game experience. He explains that in-game, you have to handle the soldier's mentality as well, but in real life, the situations are vastly different, and he didn't expect the horses to get scared too, and now he should consider more variables. Another result of reality he wasn't expecting was the kill zone walls being caught on fire from the cannon shots, and this allows the enemies to flood toward the wall. Taku wanted to end it with just the kill wall, but is glad they got most of the monsters already. He realizes the battlefield is still under his control, and Lucas arrives back with Jupiter. Taku tells her he's glad she survived, and she says she's sorry for having the rookies die in vain, and Taku tells her she didn't know a monster would appear in the air and scare the horses. Jupiter says it is her fault, and she should have been able to react to it, so she will pay it back, and no matter what it costs, she'll take that monster's neck, while staring at the boss. Taku tells her to focus on recovery, because they'll need it soon. We see the enemies rushing in, and Taku yells out that the kill zone is no longer working, and to cease fire. Taku tells Damien to take a break, and now the enemies have finally reached the fort walls, and when the armor can't break the wall, they begin to climb it instead. Taku yells for them to prepare for hand-to-hand combat, and comments on how a war without magic, and a war based on pure physical might is just the start of the war, and we see the soldiers standing above the climbing enemies. Taku orders some men to drop pieces of rubble onto the climbing enemies, and we see it knock some of them off the wall, and some of them die after hitting the floor, but others stand back up. Taku orders the soldiers to push the rest back with spears, and uses this time to reorganize the party to gain a synergy buff. He gains a mage buff of 20%, but at this point, the enemies are beginning to climb over the walls. We see a horde of them emerge over the crenellation, and Taku wonders if the soldiers will be able to fight back, and we see a yellow slash killing an armor, and a beam of light forming. We then see Lucas killing multiple of the enemies that climbed up, and he tells the soldiers he'll kill the enemies, so they just need to stand their ground and stop them. Taku yells out for Lily to activate the next artifact, and we see the artifact is called Haste, and all of the soldiers have increased movement speed. We see the soldiers pushing the enemies back. The soldiers continue to hold the enemies while Lucas kills them, and Taku explains the more enemies Lucas kills, the stronger he becomes, and that he's soloing half of the fort wall. But it's still not enough, because they are losing. Damien says he'll return to the front lines, but Taku says he needs to use his power on the boss, and wonders what to do. That there must be a way to lower injury rate, and protect the soldiers. While he's thinking, he sees a pillar of flame emerge, and he sees Lily cast magic at the enemies. Taku remembers she was a mage, and she asks if he's serious, because she's always been one. He tells her it was great, and that he'll promote her later. She tells him she'd rather just be discharged, and he tells her sure, and he'll give her a bonus too. He grabs onto the back of her wheelchair, and tells her to shoot magic again, and she cries, saying she just wants to retire, and she used all her mana. He begins wheeling her into the enemies, and she begins to scream and cry while casting fire magic. And due to the synergies, her magic is 25% stronger, and we see him wheeling her along the wall, and she's asking to be treated like a human. And just like that, they continued. The soldiers blocked the enemies, Lucas kills them, and Lily burned them with fire. The last armor drops to the floor, and the soldiers are excited that it's over, and Taku yells, telling them it's not over yet, and not to lose focus because there's still one left. They see the armor begins to fly into the air, and starts to form around the giant specter, turning into armor and weapon. The boss lets out a roar, and lands in front of the wall. Taku yells about how this is unfair, and that this shouldn't be the boss of the first level. The giant armor looks at Taku as it towers over the wall, and Taku reminds himself not to be scared and that it's still only a level 25 monster. He orders for the men to fire, and not to save a single shot. We see the cannonballs exploding on the giant armor, but it keeps walking forward through all of the explosions. While being bombarded, it continued walking. Taku tells Lily to activate the next artifact, and we learn it increases magic by 100%, but only to one person. This person will be Jupiter. Jupiter feels the buff, and says it's good, and that she feels like she's young again. Taku orders her to hit the giant armor with everything she's got, and we see Jupiter walk toward it with lightning forming in her hands. We see the lightning begins to rain from the sky as she stretches her hand out, blasting the armor's chest plate. It exposes the giant soul core, and Taku orders Damien to shoot it. We see Damien on a ballista, and he pulls the lever firing a giant bolt at the monster's core. The arrow hits it directly, and we see it begins to crack after being hit. Taku thinks the fight is over, but sees the monster is still alive, and realizes it wasn't enough, but it's too late. The monster begins to swing his sword down onto the wall. Taku realizes if it lands, it'll be over, and yells for Jupiter to hit it again, and she says raising your sword in a thunderstorm is just like asking to be electrocuted. We see small amounts of yellow lightning form around the armor, and then a yellow glare appears, and blue lightning strikes down the armor, but it isn't enough as the monster swings through it. Taku yells for everyone to run, because the sword is coming down. Lucas moves Taku out of the way, and we see the sword crash into the wall, sending some soldiers flying. Taku asks how the wall is, and everyone looks on as the sword is lodged into the wall. The armor begins to crack and disappear, and it crumbles to the floor. Just like that, they finally cleared stage 1's boss. The specters begin to reform, and Lucas yells for Taku to run, but he tells him it's okay. And Taku explains the boss's final attack isn't a physical one, but it will drive you insane. Taku raises his hand, and tells the boss it's the human's land, and to leave, and his skill activates. We see a yellow aura begins to surround the boss, and all that's left are yellow particles from where the boss was, almost like snow. The soldiers watch this and wonder where the boss went, and we see the clouds in the sky begin to split as sunlight pours through them. Taku raises his hand, saying we've won, and we've survived, and will continue to win. Taku could watch as the soldiers' eyes changed from fear to joy, and regardless if it was from his skill or not, it felt good, because he yelled with all of his heart. The night after the battle, we see a festival at the central square of the city. Taku raises a glass and says cheers, and tells everyone to drink as much as they want. Because he'll pay for all of it. The festival starts, and everyone appears to be having a good time. There's music, food, arm wrestling, etc. As Taku is watching, Lucas walks up to him and asks if he's okay. Because he hasn't eaten all day, and that his expression isn't that of a commander who has won, and reminds him that he stopped 1,000 enemies, and didn't lose that many of his own. Taku says there weren't any big casualties, but they still lost precious lives. The moment someone dies, regardless of if it was a big or small casualty, everyone is precious, and he knows he can't save everyone. But if he were just a little more careful, they wouldn't have died. Taku mentions how in the tutorial, there wasn't much he could do, but here he had options, and it hurts him because he knows he could have done better. Lucas tells him he did a great job, and comforts him, but reminds him it's a victory festival, and if Taku isn't happy, the morale will go down. So smile, and be happy right now, at least, because that's also a commander's job. Taku smiles, and Ader jumpscares him saying it's true. And while it's important to mourn sacrifices, we must take the time to celebrate too. And has brought him a plate of vegetables, because only meat isn't good. And congratulates him on clearing stage 1, and while it was a difficult job, he did well, and to keep up the good work. Taku looks happy to have received the compliment, and Taku begins to eat a tomato, and Ader yells out that he's eating a vegetable because he has no meat. The soldiers begin to apologize and cry, saying they were ignorant, and try to feed him. One of the men yells to bring all of the meat and alcohol, and we see them partying with Taku, and Lily tugs on his sleeve. He looks down at a drunk Lily, and she's bawling, asking for dischargement, please. And he tells her no. Work more. Some men take her away, and she's crying, saying she wants to quit, and Taku tells them to go tuck her in. Now Damien is drunk, and he's saying the water is beer. Taku tells him it isn't water, and he wonders who gave Damien beer, and he sees Jupiter pouring it into his cup. He asks Jupiter what she's doing, and she replies that he's not a kid, and he's a mercenary, and that she plans to treat him like a grandson. Damien leans on Taku, and tells him that when he's alone, he sees his friend's face, but when he's next to Taku, he feels at ease. Taku explains it's not because he's an important person, but because of his passive skill. Jupiter also says that her magic felt stronger under Taku, and he doesn't know how to tell her it's just a synergy buff. Lucas also says that when he's with Taku, his doubt disappears, and that he's a talented leader. Taku asks if that's why he's always by his side, and Lucas says maybe. Everyone gathers around and brings Taku alcohol, apologizing that the prince, who drank for a week straight, hasn't had any alcohol tonight. And beg him to drink. He drinks and asks if they are happy now, and he orders their drinks to all get filled and yells, let's all drink and die. It cuts to Taku back in his room, and he's opening the chests he's gotten as rewards, and he sees he's obtained a max level item, and it's a pair of gloves. Taku angrily throws the gloves against the wall, and explains that they are a comic relief item called Lucky Strike. The damage dealt is based on a roulette, and it's totally useless. He begrudgingly puts them on and thinks he might get a jackpot when he needs it, and to be optimistic. But this is short-lived as he remembers there are so many other good items he could have gotten instead. It cuts to the next day, and he has a hangover, and so does Lucas. Ader greets them both, and has brought them honey water, and tells them to drink up. Lucas devours it, and Taku decides it's time to prepare for the next stage. He goes to the wall, and we see the giant sword is still there, and asks how long it'll take to repair. The worker tells him it'll take more than 2 weeks, and Taku sees he only has 9 days left until the next stage. And tells Lucas the uninjured soldiers will support wall construction. Taku asks Ader about the reinforcement situation. Ader says a nearby city will send soldiers soon, and the already dispatched soldiers will return tomorrow. Taku tells Ader to keep him updated, and tells Lucas they should go to the dungeon. Lucas asks if he means going back to the lake, and Taku says exactly, but this time we'll be going under the lake with the rest of the party. Because it's time to change from tower defense to dungeon offense. We see the party leaving Taku's office, and we see Lily crying in her wheelchair. I wish she'd stand up for herself. Taku tells Ader to prepare supplies for the expedition, and to bring anything that can shine. The next morning we see them all gathered behind the manor, and Taku forms the gate, and tells them that they'll be going to a kingdom of monsters underneath the lake. And that this is the only way to stop the monsters forever. We see them all at the lake, and Taku tells them to stay alert, because they'll be going deeper. Taku gets a pop-up asking if they want to proceed, and a warning saying that they can't return until the next stopping point. Taku clicks yes, and we see a whirlpool form in the middle of the lake. They head into the lake, and Taku mentions how it's dark. Lucas yells out, asking for him, and Taku tells them all to stay calm and to turn on their lights. We see everyone uses torches, but Lily who has her hands. She screams, and we see some bloodborne type of city. Taku tells them it's the home of the monsters, and they'll have to clear it out piece by piece. Taku explains they can move and breathe because of ancient magic surrounding the city. Lily wonders how there could be such a large city. Lucas tells her to be quiet because someone is coming. Everyone gets ready, and we see a long white-haired person. Taku says it isn't an enemy, and that it's their first time in the dungeon, so it must be a guide NPC. She asks if they are treasure hunters, and tells them the place doesn't have what they want. Taku mentions how he's never seen her before, and wonders if she existed in-game. Taku explains there are about 100 NPCs who live in this kingdom, and one random NPC shows up as a guide, and even though he's played the game 742 times, he's never seen her. Taku tells her they came from the surface, to defeat the monsters. And that the surface world is in pain, because of the monsters. The woman says the nightmare of the kingdom will never end, and nobody can break the nightmare. And many great warriors have tried, but they've all failed. And to return before they get swallowed by the abyss. Taku stares at her, and says he's the Lord of Crossroad, the city that stops monsters. And that's why they've come to the dungeon, and that the doors are locked. He asks her to guide them, and she says sure, and it'll be nice to see if his words are those of courage, or bravado from a plain man. She says follow me, and he asks what to call her. And she says she's forgotten her name, and to call her Mew Myung. Lucas tells Taku they can't follow her, and it'll be a trap. Taku tells him it's fine, and makes a joke about him being a cuckoo clock. They arrive at their spot, and she tells him this is the entrance. Taku says it's the sewer system, and she says it's slippery, so be careful. After 5 minutes, they make it to the first area of the Lake Kingdom. Taku activates a checkpoint portal, and explains that next time they can start straight from here. Lily begs Taku asking to go back home, and he tells her no. Mew Myung tells Taku that she's stopping here, and from here on out, it's his will. Taku thanks her, and she lets out a sigh and says, the nightmare has already swallowed the kingdom. She tells him the deeper he goes, the stronger the monsters will be, and if he still chooses to continue, then to make sure he never turns off his light. And that she hopes his path forward will be blessed. Damien comments on how the darkness is weird, because even with his eyes, he cannot see past it, almost like it's alive. And asks how that woman can walk through it without a torch, but Taku doesn't have the answer. He says they'll meet her again, so they can ask her then. They equipped themselves at the checkpoint, and decided it was time to start the dungeon clear. Taku tells them they won't struggle much, and that it's time to proceed ahead. Taku explains that a dungeon's basic structure is built with rooms and passages, and that you can fight enemies, and find items, or even NPCs. The first room has 14 rats inside of it. We see the rats posturing up at the group. Taku says they are easy, and Lily screams. Taku orders Lucas to take the front, and keep his distance, and focus on the ones that are close. And for Damien to aim for their eyes or necks, and for the mages to only attack the ones that break through the defense. And Taku will watch. We see some rats jump at Lucas, and he instantly kills them. Damien takes out a couple of rats too, and just like that, the room is cleared. Lucas tells him all 13 are dead, and asks if he should collect the gems, and Taku says they aren't worth it. Taku is confused by it only being 13, because the info said 14. We see a rat above him on the ceiling, and the rat jumps down at Taku. Taku screams and punches the rat, and hits a jackpot, sending the rat flying into a wall and turning into a pancake. Taku says it's rare to get above 100. Lucas asks him if he's okay, and asks how he killed the monster in one shot. Taku debates on what to say, and tells him it's called the Prince Punch, and then bullshits that when a royal family member is in an emergency situation, they can activate superpowers. Lucas believes it, and everyone else isn't buying it. They quickly move on to the second room, and Taku says there's something hidden. Damien finds something, and it turns out to be a treasure chest. Taku tells him good job, but it could be a mimic, and is interrupted by a greedy Jupiter running toward the chest. It's revealed not to be a trap, and she comes to her senses and apologizes, saying she can't control herself when she smells money. And gives Taku the chest, and he makes a joke about her having stuff in her pockets. They continue onward, and easily clear the next room full of rats, and finally appear at the boss's room. Taku tells them once they clear this, they'll go home. When they head in, they're overcome by the smell of blood, and they see a giant rat creature eating other rats. It says there's no end to the rats, and that it needs to eradicate the rats, to make the kingdom pristine. Damien is surprised the rat is speaking the human language, and the rat thing hears him speaking and asks if there's another rat alive. The creature is revealed to be a giant rat man named Sewer Manager Peleg, and is level 15. Peleg lets out a scream, and says no matter how many he kills, there are still rats. Taku is confused about why it has a human name, and Peleg leaps toward them, and Taku realizes he needs to say something. Lily screams rats and unleashes flames toward Peleg, and it burns him, which causes him to roll on the floor. Lily yells "Don't come near me," while everyone watches, confused. We see a burned Peleg, and he begins to step back up again, but Jupiter tells him he can stop here, and good night. And we see a lightning bolt pierces Peleg's skull, and then shocks him. As he dies, he says he has to clean out all the rats. Taku is surprised by how quick the boss fight was, and mentions how early bosses have no resistance to magic, and if it were just physical attacks, it would have been difficult. Lily grabs Taku's shoulder, and asks if they are going home now, teary-eyed. He asks if she's scared, and she asks how can she not be with so many rats in the room. They all approach the boss's treasure chest, and Taku tells him to hold on to Jupiter, and we see him lift her away, while she screams. Taku pulls out a rat slicer, and it has a 25% DMG increase to rats. He gives it to Lucas, and says while it's not better than his regular sword, they'll use it. The next thing he finds is a summoning scroll that uses an automatic defense turret, and this was the item he was looking for, and the reason they came here. He tells them it's time to leave, and Lily is happy. After walking past the boss room, they finally entered the inside of the Lake Kingdom, and the second area called Hidden Alleyway. Taku is surprised by how developed it is, and explains the kingdom was the epitome of a magic society, but it's strange there's not a single source of light, or a living being in sight, and that it's covered in darkness, and the dead. We see a lamp post with some rocks underneath it, and Taku approaches it and summons the portal to take them back home, and tells them it's time to leave. We see a person approaching their portal fragments, and says, so he's the last player, and he's made it all the way here. We see the figure pull out a flute, and we see an enormous horde of rats. And the figure's face is revealed to be a mask, and he says, forgive our sins, while standing in the middle of the giant rats, and that everyone is for the Lake Kingdom. Taku tells everyone to rest well, and Jupiter says she doesn't know if she'll be able to after seeing all of that, and asks Taku if he can tell her any more about it. Taku says he doesn't know anything, but he has a hunch, and they should figure things out one by one. Jupiter decides she won't be able to sleep sober, so she'll drink, and Lily says she will too, and they head off. Damien heads back to the temple, and Lucas asks Taku if they'll be going back in to scout for the enemies, and Taku says they already have. And Taku explains that the enemies are going to be the rats, and the monsters first fill up the exploration zone, and then overflow and head to their city. They arrive back at the mansion, and Ader yells that there's a big issue, and that there are no reinforcements. It cuts to the next day, and Ader explains that a war has broken out, and the Empire is currently fighting, and gathering soldiers, so they cannot send any reinforcements. Taku realizes something is off, because the Empire is always at war, and regardless of the time, they are always fighting with neighboring countries, but all of the soldiers are gone coincidentally when he asks for reinforcements. Ader says there are also no new mercenaries, and Taku wonders what to do. And Ader laughs at him. Taku asks him what's funny, and if he knows how to get more soldiers, to which Ader says he does, but it's a pain in the ass. Taku says he doesn't care, that he needs them now and to tell him. Ader says okay, and to follow him. We see them outside with horses, and Lucas asks where he plans to go. Ader says he's going to see the past lord, and they are going to the house of Front Count Cross. Taku explains that a front count is a count that protects the frontier, and because they are tasked with the job of protection, they have the normal authority of a count. So they aren't just nobles, but military commanders who are defending a region. While heading over, Ader explains that ever since people started coming to Crossroad, the front count has ruled the area, and the fort city is named after the count. The road that the Cross family built is called Crossroad, and he's protected it since its creation. Taku asks why he gave up his position, and Ader explains the front count has more authority than the emperor, but he gave up his position and asked for it to be ruled by the empire, which is why Ash is the leader now. Taku wonders why, and Ader says it's a complicated situation and it's better if he heard it in person. We see a manor off in the distance, and once they are at the gate, Ader explains the place was built as a vacation house for the Cross family. And after he resigned, he moved here. The place is extremely overgrown, and Taku asks if someone actually lives here, and they hear a voice yelling, asking who's there. We see an old man with alcohol asking how dare they come in here, and to get away from his house. Ader runs up and tells him it's him, and the man says long time no see. Taku is shocked that the front count is this old man. Ader tells the count who Taku is, and Taku introduces himself to him while being formal, and decides he can't be informal to the count. The count quickly tells him to get out, and this confuses Taku, and the count yells for him to get out. Taku explains that formalities are important, and yells at the man calling him insolent, and goes to remind him of their hierarchy, but the man has a lance and a shield out, and Taku quickly changes his mind. Taku explains if you raise your weapon to the Empire, you're crazy, and the count yells to get out again. Taku says he'll be back next time, and he hopes they can have a proper conversation. The count yells don't come back, and to leave him alone, Taku holds Lucas back like a dog. Taku explains the count never appeared in the game, but he is the father of the best tanker in the game, Evangeline Cross, and she's an SSR character. Taku needs to get on his good side, and he asks Ader how the count will solve the reinforcement problem, and Ader explains that he has a private army. Taku wonders what to do, and Ader suggests that only a drunkard can get close to another drunkard. It cuts to Taku yelling for the count again, and the man comes out saying he must not care for his life, but he sees a wagon beside Taku, and Taku shows him it's a bunch of alcohol. Taku offers the count a drink, but says he doesn't have to. The count says no, and to come in and bring all of it with him. It cuts to Lily having a pleasant dream, but instantly returns back to Taku entering the count's estate. Taku mentions that it reeks of alcohol. They both sit down at a table, and the count mentions it's been a while since he's drank with someone, and even if the house is dirty, the cups must be clean. The man drinks some of the alcohol, and Taku asks how can he appreciate the taste if he just chugs it like that, and the count says, if he wants to compare it to his usual cheap drinks, wouldn't he just chug it the same way? Taku doesn't know if it's right, because he doesn't drink. Taku tries to start a conversation, and the count tells him not to, and just continue drinking, and if he wants to talk about something, he should leave. Taku asks for snacks, and the count hands him a bag of dried fruit he made from the orchard, and shows him it's right outside the window, and says he takes care of it as a hobby. Taku spits out the fruit asking why it's so bitter. The count says, how dare you spit out the fruit I worked so hard to grow, and calls him rude. Then spits it out too. And he says he grew it, but it tastes like trash. He gives it to Taku as a gift, and Taku asks why he's giving it as a gift when he can't eat it. The Count says if he could eat it, he would, and why would he give it to him? Taku is confused, but says it's persuasive. The Count explains that the land here is fertile, and there's no better place to grow fruit. Taku asks what's wrong with the taste then, and the Count says that the issue is being invaded by monsters every other day, and the monsters destroy crops, and kill farmers. And when they die, they leak energy into the ground, and it contaminates the entire area, which will lead to all the crops dying. And this is why Crossroad has no crop fields, and the Count looks regretful as he stares at his alcohol. Taku asks why he's growing crops then, and the Count says everyone has one regret in life, and the orchard is his regret. And that he can't even get drunk when he wants to. Taku asks him if he knows why he's there, and the Count says he warned him not to change the topic, but Taku says to kick him out if he wants, but he will say what he has to. Taku explains that the monsters are moving again, and their size is massive, and the last invasion was 1,000 living armors, and while they were able to stop them, the walls were heavily damaged, and the soldiers aren't competent enough, so they need military support from the Count. The Count tells him that he has no soldiers, because when he gave up his title as the Lord, he let go of the spear and shield, and that his friends all retired too. Taku tells him to recall them, and the Count tells him it's useless, because the land isn't worth protecting, and it's better to evacuate people instead of fighting. Taku is confused about why someone from the Cross family is saying this, and the Count asks him why he's come to Crossroad, and that everything is dying, and there's no future. And the only advice he can offer him, as someone who's spent his life protecting this place, is to just leave, before the curse swallows him whole. We see Taku leaving the manor, and Lucas asks how it went. Taku says he failed, but he got a gift, and that he's planning to return. Taku asks why the Count is like this, and Lucas says he doesn't know either. Taku says it's time to go back to Crossroad, and they have a lot to do. It shows the next stage is over 3,000 rats. The next morning we see the broken pieces of the sword, and one of the union members is saying they'll clean up debris, and then start repairing. Taku tells them don't clean the debris up, just spread it around instead, and use it as a barricade to stop the rats. Taku asks how long it'll take for the wall to be repaired, and the man says 10 days. Taku tells the man he'll take care of the materials and workers, and just try to get it done in a week. The man begins to talk back, and Taku barks at him. Taku mentions again that there will be 3,000 of the dog-sized rats from the sewer. A few days pass, and during the day, Taku helps with repairs, and at night would drink with the Count. They didn't talk, just drank. The wall was steadily being rebuilt, and his liver was steadily breaking down. After 4 days of silently drinking, the Count finally spoke to him. He asks if he is someone he loves, and Taku is confused, so the Count repeats his question. The Count tells him to think hard about it, and Taku reminisces about the past, and how he was alone, and not loved by anyone, and he never loved anyone either. But he started streaming and received love from a viewer, but it was all one-sided, and no matter how hard he thinks, there is nobody. The Count tells him it sounds like he's had a hard life, and Taku asks if that's something someone who drinks alone should say, and asks him if he has someone he loves. The Count looks sad, and says he did, and that the only person he loved was his wife, but she died 3 years ago. She was ripped apart by monsters in the orchard, and they had to hold a funeral with an empty coffin. And he mentions there's a curse on the Lords of Crossroad, and it'll force you to choose between the city, and their precious person, and there's never been an exception. Even his parents, and their parents couldn't avoid it, and nor could he. He recalls how there wasn't any activity from the monsters, and the city was peaceful, but due to this had no income. So he started his own business, and his wife told him to farm south where they are currently. And after word spread of fertile land, immigrants began to flock over, and due to there being only a few monsters, they easily protected themselves. And his wife took leak of their orchard, and doing all the most dangerous parts, and he recalls her feeding him grapes, and that they were sweeter than anything else in this world. He had hoped that he could stop killing the monsters, and he could work in the fields to harvest fruit, and he hoped it to be the case. But it was impossible. It was their second year of farming. They received intel about a horde approaching the city, and he quickly rushed to the city as his wife told him goodbye. And afterward, he went to the city, and they told him the monsters split into groups. One group invaded the farmland, and the others attacked the main city. And he had to choose between his wife, or the thousands of citizens. And he chose the city as all of his ancestors before him had, and after they defeated them, He came back to the farmland, the fields were ruined, and the people were killed, including his orchard and his wife. While it was his fault, he regrets abandoning his wife, and he mentions how his daughter didn't understand why he chose the city over her mother, and she left him. And in the end, his choice has left him without his wife, and his daughter, and now he's alone. He tells Taku it's just an example, but there will be a point where he will need to choose someone precious to him, and the city. Taku mentions how it doesn't sound like a curse, but an unavoidable fate. The Count says he refuses to pass this job on to his daughter, and Taku understands why he resigned, because he wants his daughter to get out of this cursed land, and to live happily. Taku thinks that the SSR ranked tank he wants so bad, is someone the Count doesn't want in the battle. The Count mentions Taku's request to aid him, and tells him he's fought enough and that he wants to quit now. And that he just wants to die in this orchard, not on the fort wall, and his eyes were full of nothing but regret about his wife. The Count tells him this much should explain why he can't help, and he told him this out of gratitude for staying with him, but now it's time to leave, but his final advice is to choose well when the time comes. It cuts to the 5th day of repairs, and there are 2 days left until the stage starts. Taku commends everyone for their good work, and brings them food to eat. The union leader says because of Taku's help, they should be able to complete the repairs in 2 days. Taku says they can finally attach that, and it turns out to be the auto turret from the dungeon clear. He uses the scroll, and he obtains the ability to summon the turret. He gathers some debris and holds a mana core from his previous chest rewards. He chooses on the map where to install the turret, and we watch the debris fly up and build it. We see the tank-like cannon finished assembling, and everyone looks on in awe. Moses drools at the sight of it. Taku thanks everyone for their hard work, and tells them to keep it up. He mentions the mood is nice, and it'll be good if it stays like this. He stops by the blacksmith, and we see Lucas is happy with his new armor, and how it was made using the Spectre Knight's mana core. Taku doesn't like the fact the durability is glass-like. But it has the ability to make him immune for 5 seconds from damage. Lucas cries and tells Taku he'll use it well, and Taku says he should give him gifts more often. The blacksmith thanks him for commissioning him, and Taku says he'll come back often because the equipment is critical. Taku tells Lucas it's time to go to the west side of the city, for an important event. It cuts to the west field, and we see cannon fire going off to remember those who died. They held a funeral for the soldiers who died in the previous stage, and they buried the coffins. There weren't many who died in the last stage, and Taku doesn't know if it was a good or bad thing. It shows a choir singing, and Taku paying respects to the graves. It cuts to night time, and Taku and Lucas are at the graveyard. The Count comments on Taku using most of the city's funds for funerals, and calls it a royal way of using money. The Count says because this is the front line, lives are being taken insanely fast, and there will be a time he can't cover it up with good deeds. Taku asks if he came all this way to say that, or if he ran out of alcohol. The Count says he came here after asking his companions for their opinions, and that he asked if they wanted to protect the city, and they all said they would. Taku screams, and tells him this is the best news he's heard all week. The Count says he doesn't know how much help they will provide, but they are arming themselves right now, and to use them carefully. Taku thanks the Count, and Taku says he's really grateful to him. The Count looks toward the city and says this is all the help he can give, and to take care of the city, and good luck. Taku says he'll do his best, and he'll visit when he needs words of wisdom, and the Count says wisdom, my ass, just bring me alcohol. The Count and Taku banter, then he lets out a sigh and leaves, waving goodbye. Taku wanted to stop him, and even if he is old, he is a commander who has fought on the front line his entire life, so he will be a lot of help this time, but he's lost too many things, so he couldn't stop him. And only watched as he left, because he believed the next time they'd be able to talk more, and he'd give him more advice. But he never thought there wouldn't be a next time. It cuts to 2 days later, and it's the start of the stage. The wall has been repaired, and they have enough materials, a larger army, and his baby, aka the turret. The kill zone has also been prepared, and everything is perfect. We see the masked man standing away from the castle. We see a soldier on horse reporting that the monsters are coming, and we see a horde of rats charging off in the distance. Taku tells everyone to be ready, and to not lower their guard. Taku mentions how even after all of his playthroughs, he's never been this well prepared from the start. The masked man looks at Taku, and Taku wonders who the man is. He asks Lucas if he sees the man, but he's gone. He yells for Damien, asking if he saw him, and Damien says nobody is there. Taku wonders if it's a hallucination, but if it wasn't, then who was that guy? Taku tells himself to calm down, because all he needs to do is stop them. He tells the cannon squad to get ready, and they fire. We see a storm of cannonballs rain down onto the horde of rats, exploding all around them, and blowing them up inside the kill zone. Taku mentions that because of how many rats there are, it makes them group more, so if they keep pouring attacks down, they can get rid of a bunch of them. It cuts to 30 minutes later, and we see that there are already 1,000 rats dead, and at this rate, it won't be a problem, but he notices rats climbing over the kill zone, due to the mountain of rat corpses. One of the walls breaks, and now they are running free through the kill zone. Taku tells everyone to change fire location, and Taku mentions that there's still the debris from the sword, but he watches as the rats dodge the cannonballs and ballista shots. He says at this rate, there will be more than expected reaching the fort wall. We see the turret turn and launch a barrage of bullets at the rats. Taku overlooks the massive explosion from the turret, and drools at how effective it is. But regardless of how good it is, it cannot defend the battlefront alone, and not it's in a reloading sequence. Taku says there are too many, and it's moving faster than he expected, and the sword fragments are doing their part, but it's just a matter of time until the fort wall is reached. And now he realizes hand-to-hand combat is unavoidable. He's surprised by some cannon fire actually hitting the rats, and he watches a barrage of shots actually hit them, and wonders who it is. And he sees it's the Silver Army, and is surprised by how effective they are. We see the Silver Army encouraging all the men, and guiding them as mentors. And they tell Taku don't worry, they'll handle the soldiers. Taku decides to trust in them, and we see their defenses are going smoothly as Taku watches the battlefield. Taku says thanks to the Silver Army, they are able to effectively attack the rats, and if you're curious about what our party is doing, and it shows Lucas commanding the front lines, Damien is shooting, and we see him killing some rats. And while he's a long-distance sniper, it feels like he's less prominent in a broad battle, but it's still meaningful. Lily is in charge of managing the artifacts, and we see her commanding the mages, and she looks at Taku and gives him a wink. But he looks away from her. Next, it shows Jupiter just laying on top of the wall, and Taku stares at her. She begins to make excuses, like her back hurts when gathering mana. He tells her she better does her job properly later, and she raises a glass and says of course. And thanks to everyone's help, but Jupiter, the battlefield is being maintained, and we see another storm of turret blasts shooting the horde of rats. Taku is in love with it. And at this rate, they'll smoothly clear the stage. And he wonders if this will be the first time they clear a stage without big damages, but he spots the man in the mask again. He uses his map function, and can see a hostile NPC is intruding. Taku explains that there are many events that can happen during stages, and NPC trespassing is one of these events. Whether the NPC is from the Lake Kingdom, or an enemy empire, they can ruin the stage. Taku says it isn't time for this, and Ader isn't here, so he can't ask him either. Taku yells at Damien, asking if he can see the man, and he asks if he means the bard. Taku orders him to shoot him, and Damien says he looks like a person, and not a monster. Taku tells him he has to shoot him now, and explains that he's an NPC from Lake Kingdom, with a bard look, and that Damien has to shoot him before he plays his flute. Damien hesitates, and Taku reminds him that he's meant to be his trigger, and if he doesn't want to see more death, he needs to shoot him now. Taku hears the sound of the flute, and realizes it's too late as he looks onto the battlefield. We see the man put the flute down, and the rats stop moving for a second, and then make a full Zerg rush toward the center of the wall. Lucas mentions that's just where they finished construction, and Taku yells for everyone to change their target area and to use all of their firepower. We see the cannons blast, but the defenses aren't keeping up with the Zerg, and their movements are too sudden. They witness one of the rats dive straight into the wall unaliving itself, and he wonders what they are trying to do. The rats continued ramming their heads into the wall. We see more ramming into it. Taku mentions that everyone tried their best, but under such time constraints, the wall isn't perfect, and because they only focused on empty parts, there's still a crack. And that the rats are slamming their bodies into that crack, and are using their claws to bend the metal, and biting the rocks. Simply put, they are digging the fort wall down. Taku looks panicked, and says it might just be him, but at that moment, it looks like the bard laughed. Taku explains that the players call the NPC the Pied Piper, and he orders Damien to shoot again. But Damien hesitates again, and the Pied Piper vanishes, and Taku yells, but notices it's too late. Damien apologizes and cries, saying he can't shoot a person. And Taku says it's to be expected because Damien is a healer at the end of the day, but he will need to get used to shooting humans because there are many humans among their enemies. Taku tells him they'll talk later, and now he has to solve the raticide problem. Taku tells Jupiter she has work to do, and we see she's already ready, because she knew he'd call for her. He tells her to fry them all, and we see her lightning attack the rats. Taku tells Lily to prepare the flamethrower artifacts, and we see them from on the castle wall. It shows the lightning raining down on the rats, and flames hitting them from the sides. Taku mentions how if they all gather in one spot, they can just make it the new kill zone. He makes a goofy face and mocks the rats, but notices the stage information was revealed, and there are 3 boss mobs. Ratman champions, and we hear one of them roaring, and due to their names being revealed, it means they've appeared on the battlefield. We see the 3 giant ratmen, and that their objective is to break through the fort wall. Taku yells for his men to stop them, and we see one of the champions running at the wall, and he tells the men to stop standing there, and they begin to unleash attacks on one of the champions, and if it hits the wall, then it'll collapse. We see the auto turret shoots toward the champion, and it hits him. It dies, but there are still 2 more running at the wall. Taku tells his men not to save ammo, and to shoot. He activates the magic multiplier on Jupiter again, and we see her stretch her arm out, telling the rats to get ready. She calls down a massive lightning storm on the front line, melting countless rats. However, it isn't enough for the champion, due to it being spread out. He calls for Lily to activate the flamethrower, but she tells him it's still on cooldown, and he says he knows. She realizes what he means, and begins screaming while shooting flames. She hits one of the champions, killing it, but there's still one left, and it continues moving forward. Taku yells to stop him, and we see Lucas holding his sword, and throwing it across the battlefield, piercing the champion. He says they still need another shot, and Taku tells Damien to hurry. Damien fires his crossbow, hitting the rat in the eye. Taku thinks it's defeated, but we see the champion continues running toward the wall. The champion prepares its shoulder and dives straight through the wall, and just like that, the wall has been breached. It shows the Count watching the battlefield from atop a hill, and he realizes something is wrong with this invasion. And that it's completely different from when he was a lord. Not only are the numbers massive, the combination too. Instead of a mix of monsters, it was a unified army. He wonders if all of Taku's battles were like this. The Count realizes now why Taku was so desperate for his help, and wonders if he should help or not. He remembers his wife, and he says no, because he's retired. As he heads back, he hears the sound of the champion crashing through the wall, and he convinces himself to just keep going to the orchard, to protect his wife this time. Taku tells his troops to evacuate the citizens, and he tells everyone that they'll go down to the bottom, except a few to stay atop. He tells Lucas to command the combat soldiers, and everyone else will maintain firing atop the wall. He tells Jupiter to fight on her own judgment, but to kill as many as possible, and as soon as she gathers mana to shoot out lightning. He asks Lily what artifacts are available now, and she says only haste. He asks about the flamethrower, and she says it has 10 minutes left. He tells her to use haste on the combat soldiers, and to use the flamethrower as soon as it's charged. He goes to Damien and realizes he's been crying, and that Damien is probably blaming himself, so he flicks his forehead and tells him he's been doing great. And he won't blame him for a small mistake, so don't lose confidence, and his presence alone is a great strength. So he should trust himself. He tells Damien he'll be in charge of the back lines, and to kill the rats that break through their defenses. Taku tells everyone to get ready, and we see the soldiers beside the champion's corpse. A rat climbs over the corpse, and Lucas kills it, showing the rat slicer. And he tells everyone the entrance is narrow and to stay calm and kill them one by one. Taku from above realizes there are more and more rats coming through the hole, and sees them eating a wider opening. The flamethrower is ready now, and Lily begins to scream. When Taku looks over, he sees rats are eating the alchemists, and one of the alchemists asks Lily for help. Taku hits a rat with a prince punch, only dealing 15 damage, but sending it flying. He wonders if they are climbing the wall, and we see that they are. Lily begins to cry and begins to burn the rats. With the artifacts unable to activate due to their deaths, and the injuries in the combat troops, and the cannon teams are losing men too. At this rate, the damage will be uncontrollable. One of the Silver Knights yells out, saying it's the Count. Taku looks over, and sees a shining lance and the Count riding into the battlefield. The Count screams for the rats trying to draw their aggro. Taku realizes it's a large area taunt, and wonders what the Count is doing. Taku yells out to him, asking what he's doing, and tells him he's going to die. The Count's backstory is explained as someone who is always killing something, and he was born in a city to stop monsters, and even when his father died, and he took his position as Count, he killed monsters every day, and his world was simple and clear. This was the case, before his wife came to the city. It shows him asking what she's selling here, and she hands him a flower, and he was baffled by her. He tells her it's the front line, and what they need are weapons, and what use are flowers because they die quickly. And she tells him that's exactly why people need flowers. The fact they die quickly is what makes them beautiful. He couldn't understand her, and he thought she was a spy, and he kept visiting her store every day for proof of her being a spy. He learned a lot about different flowers, and ended up memorizing them, and he still couldn't understand why they were beautiful, and after a year, he proposed to her. It cuts back to the present, and we see all the rats turning to look at him, and he charges straight into the enemy army. It cuts to another flashback, of him seeing his wife holding their daughter, and he just came from a war, so he was bloodied. But he gently held his daughter, Evangeline. His wife asks isn't she pretty, and he couldn't answer because he was confused. She wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, and he still didn't understand how something so small and tiny made his heart choke up like this. Just a few moments ago, he was out killing monsters, and now he's witnessing this, and it confused him. It goes back to the present, and Taku is yelling for everyone to organize quickly, and not to shoot anything, so they don't hit the Count. And to just shoot crossbows or arrows on the other side, away from the Count. He tells Lucas to take the soldiers who can fight outside the wall, and to rescue the Count. Lucas tells him it isn't a rescue, and from this position, they can attack the rats from behind, and they can finish the rats and return with the Count after. Lucas raises his sword and leads the men to battle, and Taku is just repeating to himself, please don't be late. We see the Count is covered in blood, fighting the rats to no end. He doesn't understand himself. While fighting the rats, he didn't understand what he was doing. Even though he promised his wife he'd die beside her, he made the same decision again. And he wonders why he's fighting again for this hellish city. We see him charge deeper into the army, and he blocks them with his shield, but gets sent flying backward. He spent his whole life trying to understand himself, but there's only one thing he knows for sure. As he screams in for another charge at the army, he recalls a flower and his daughter. And that those weak and small things must be protected, and that he's good at killing monsters. He yells out while crying that his daughter is living behind this wall, and that this is the world his daughter lives in, so he will not let a single one of them pass through the wall. We see him getting cut and wounded all over his body, and he screams, but this didn't stop him from fighting. He knew no matter how many orchards he grew, or monsters he killed, his peaceful days are over, and for a man who only knows how to fight, he must swing his lance once again. It shows him slaughtering the rats, and one after another, he repeats to himself, that he just needs one more. And he sat there prepared for his final opponent, but there are no sounds. And he wonders why the monsters aren't attacking anymore, or if he's perhaps already dead. He looks over to see Lucas, and he tells him the monsters are all dead, and the battle is over, so he can rest now. We see the Count is heavily wounded, and drops his lance. We see Taku arriving, and Lucas telling him they were too late. As he walks through the soldiers, he sees the Count on the ground, and Damien healing him. He calls for Damien, and Damien shakes his head. Taku wonders if this potion he has can heal him, but the Count tells him to stop. That it isn't a wound a potion can heal, and to just help him up. We see Taku holding him, and the Count asks if the battle is over, and Taku says yes. The Count mentions the wall was breached, and Taku says yes, but not a single monster made it inside. And the Count says that's good. He notices the heavy atmosphere, and tells everyone not to be so gloomy. And that someone dying shouldn't surprise them at the monster front, and it's just his turn to go. And not to be sad about every death, and to be happy they survived and won. He looks up to Taku and tells him it's the city of graves, and there are a lot of deaths, but even atop the graves, people are still living on, and if the city mourns, then the city will stop. And while it's good to take care of funerals, he needs to make sure to give everyone happiness along with it. Taku tells him he'll do so, because people live on by hope. The Count says it's his time to die because he has no more hope, but to promise him one thing. Taku tells him he'll do his best, and the Count says if his daughter ever comes back, tell her that he's sorry. And to tell her to be free, and to live however she wants. Taku says he'll tell her, and the Count says he's sorry to his wife, because he didn't keep his promise, and that the orchard, their daughter, and everything. But Taku interrupts him and says no, and that he saved the world, not only once, but throughout his entire life, he's protected every human beyond the battlefront. And that the world is indebted to him. The Count doesn't reply, and instead says he's sorry, and in the end, he did nothing. Taku realizes the man isn't listening to his words, but remembers the dried fruit the Count gave him, and he takes a piece out and feeds the Count. And the Count recalls when his wife fed him the grape, and he mentions how sweet it tasted, and that was his final breath. The bell rang in the distance to signify the invasion was over, and Taku continued to hold on to the Count. He couldn't understand why the Count, who hated his bloodline, and the city, came back at the last moment and fought, and why he died for it. Taku doesn't know why the battlefield made someone sacrifice their life for it, and tells the Count it's heavy, the position of the Lord is too heavy. We see the soldiers surrounding the two, and it displays the stage clear, and displays the MVP, and that the Count has died. It cuts to Taku going back to his manor, and Ader calling out to him, telling him he was worried. Taku calls out to him. Ader says, he's done well this stage too, and it's impressive. Taku grabs onto him and yells for him to tell him, and to stop playing dumb. Why is the difficulty so high, and the tutorial was normally like that, so he brushed it off, and he blamed stage 1 on bad luck, but an enemy NPC in stage 2, even hell mode, didn't do that. And he asks again why the game is so difficult, and to tell him why he pretended to help him, then hid these conditions from him. Ader says he might not believe him, but he's helping in his own way, and it's the truth. Taku gets aggressive, and tells him to stop the bullshit, and asks why he didn't tell him. Ader mentions his necklace, and tells him if he clears the next stage, its function will unlock, and when it does, he'll understand everything that's happening right now, so just clear the next stage and figure it out. And he hopes that Taku will understand, and he truly hopes when he learns the truth, he can continue to fight as he has been, because once he knows the truth, he cannot escape. When Taku asks him what he'll need to escape from, Ader says the world itself. It's been 3 days since the end of the second stage, and the atmosphere was heavy, but like always, they began to prepare for the next wave. While heading back to the manor, Taku realizes they have quite a bit of time until the next stage, but he notices a figure outside the manor wall. It turns out to be a girl, and he meets eyes with her, but when he goes to tell Lucas about it, she jumps at him. Stabbing the side of the carriage, Taku screams, and the girl is surprised, because she only wanted to damage the wheel. Lucas asks Taku if he's alright, and he says somewhat. And then Lucas yells at the girl, asking who she is, and that he'll arrest her. Taku is surprised it's just a kid, and Lucas says don't underestimate someone based on their age, and she's been formally trained. And points out that her uniform is of the Royal Academy, and Lucas asks what a student is doing here, and to reveal herself. She asks why they want to know, and calls them old men. This angers both of them, and she tells them this is her house, and she doesn't understand why there are soldiers and people she's never seen before guarding it. And that she's lacking information, so she stopped the carriage to get some. Taku yells, telling her to ask next time, and she says her school taught her if she suspects someone to be an enemy, then to assert dominance. And she apologizes for breaking the carriage by mistake. She asks why they are living in her house, and Lucas says to cut the crap, because it's where the Lord lives, so obviously, it belongs to the Lord. She asks him what he's talking about because her dad is the Lord. They both realize that she's the Count's daughter. And Taku tells her he learned a lot about her from her father, and he's confused because the tanker from the game was a tall beautiful woman, and not a vertically challenged girl. He tells her she's shorter than he thought, and he wonders why it's so different, because, so far everyone else has been the same as in game. Lucas tells him judging based on appearance is rude, and Evangeline looks embarrassed, and asks if he has multiple lives. Taku says he only has one, and she says he should take better care of it, and pulls out a shield. And she says she's changed her mind, and earlier was a mistake, but now it's serious. She rushes toward him, and he says she's similar to the Count. Lucas blocks her lance and tells her to put it down, because Taku is the third prince of the empire. She says they are not only trespassing, but doing identity theft too, and kicks his sword away. And says there's no way the crazy third prince would come here, and Lucas knocks her back. She says he has skills, and Lucas says he's an alumnus of the academy, and that he was second place in his class and tells her his name. And that Taku also graduated from the academy too. She asks if they think she's an idiot who can't tell who her seniors are, and introduces herself as first place in her class, and rushes at them again. Her and Lucas trade blows, and Taku is surprised by how well they both fight, and that it's fun to watch. But at this rate, someone will be hurt, so he tells them both to stop. And that there's been a misunderstanding, so they should talk it out. They ignore him, and he asks if they can't hear him, and he understands they are both focused on their battle. And looks down at his lucky strike and realizes it's his only chance. And even if it's weak, he just needs to break the situation, so he plans to just hit her lightly. He yells Prince Punch, and we see he hits a massive jackpot of 777, and then he looks disgusted at the timing, and we see a rainbow beam form from the sky. He makes a funny face, and says he's unlucky, and we see the damage from the punch on the manor. Lucas is surprised and says it was impressive, and asks how he did it, but then says that's not the issue, and we see Evangeline on the floor. Lucas asks how can be so cruel to a child. They look at each other and ask if she's dead. It cuts to a flashback of Evangeline when she was young, and that her mother would always comfort her when the monsters attacked the city, and her mother would tell her she came to make sure she wasn't crying in fear, and Evangeline always knew that her mother was the one afraid of the monsters. And she asks her why she's scared, when Dad always kills the monsters, and Evangeline realizes her mother wasn't afraid of the monsters, but of losing her husband. And that it's her destiny to fight too. She wakes up in her room and covers herself in her blanket when someone enters the room. Taku pulls up a chair, and he asks him how he's been, and when he doesn't answer, she says it's obvious even if he doesn't answer, and that he's had the best day of his life hunting the monsters. She begins to think to herself that this isn't what she's wanted to say, and Taku tells her that he's not her father. She goes to reach for her weapon, then notices she's in bandages and wonders if she was injured. Taku says he must have hit her too hard, and she recalls what happened and calls him an old man again. She calls him frail and old once more, and he jokes with her. But reintroduces himself as the Prince of the Empire, and she asks why he's spewing nonsense, and says if he's the prince, she's the queen. He holds up a plaque with his family logo, and she's surprised that he's the real deal. She begins to shake and tells him she's his fan, and asks for his autograph. And she reveals that she's his fan because he's insane, and that she wanted to rebel against her father too, and to destroy her reputation and cause problems, and that's why she left home, but after the academy, she was forced to be a model student. Taku mentions how she graduated in 3 years, when it was meant to take 6. And she tells him the most rebellious thing she could do was not contact her father for 3 years. He tells her that's adorable, and she mentions how she's heard Taku's story. That despite his father being the emperor, he disappointed everyone daily, and constantly changed headlines. And describes some of the dumb things he's done to garner his reputation, and tells him he's cool. He makes a joke about how Ash's life wasn't in vain, because he became a role model for being trash. She asks him where her dad is, and asks if he knew about her plan and hid in advance. Taku asks if she really didn't hear the news, and she wonders if something happened. He tells her he's sorry, but her father has died. And it was a few days ago in battle, he sacrificed his life to save everyone, and he died a hero. So Taku recorded all of his accomplishments, and sent them to the Empire, and due to him working all his life, he'll receive a Medal of Honor. He tells her the funeral is in 3 days, and she begins to laugh, saying just when she was going to be a bad daughter, he decides to run away. And she mentions how he always talked about dying while fighting, and that now he can't receive her wrath. Taku says he's sorry, and that he's the current lord and the commander, and that his death is his responsibility, so place the wrath onto him. She asks if he's really the prince, because the prince is meant to not care about others, and calls him insane. He tells her to stop calling him that, and she thanks him for taking care of her. He tells her there are servants outside, so if she needs anything, just ask. As he goes to leave, she apologizes for yesterday, and for the carriage, and for right now. He tells her okay, and to rest well. Ader explains that Evangeline is 16, and that when she appears in game it's a few years later, but some things have happened and caused her to appear earlier. Taku looks at her stats, and is surprised by her agility, even though she's a tank, and he drools over her stats, and her 100% resistance to physical abnormalities. Taku notices she has a trait called Little Miss Clumsy. Taku says it's good she appeared early, but now she has this negative trait. And she's so young, that she should be hanging out with friends, rather than fighting on a battlefield, and he recalls someone calling him Hyung. Ader asks him if he wants to recruit Evangeline, and Taku says he'd be lying if he didn't want to, and having two SSRs at stage, especially both Lucas and Evangeline, would be nice, but he recalls the Count's words, and how he promised him, and that the Count's final plea was for his daughter to live freely. So he has to keep his promise, so he's going to let Evangeline do what she wants. Ader comments on how his face is contradicting his words, and Ader mentions how they should be able to keep her here, and if he loses her, he'll regret it. Taku says he will, but he doesn't want to sacrifice his morals to clear a stage. Ader comments on how it's because he didn't care for morals he was able to clear Hell Sage mode. Taku says that's true, but if he cleared it the same way, then it means he didn't improve. And that he wants to be a better person than yesterday. Ader says, that one day that will come back to harm him. Taku tells him he doesn't care, he's not trying to be a saint, but he doesn't want to be a monster. In a world where lives aren't heavy, he wants to be a human. That's all. Taku tells Ader to look after Evangeline, and Ader says he will, but asks him about her lance and shield, and after evaluating them, they both turned out to be SSR ranked items, and now they are too broken to be salvaged. Taku is worried because they were such high ranked items, and Ader says they can make her some new equipment using the cores from the last raid. But Taku is making an expression that he messed up, because he already used the cores. He asks Ader if he gives his Lucky Strike gloves away if it would solve the problem. He calls for Ader to gather the party, because he wants to get mana cores, and then he can just build her some equipment. A few hours later, they gathered at the portal entrance, and Taku asks if everyone has rested well. Lily cries and asks why it's her again, and for Taku to take the new recruits instead. He explains that the new recruits are N-ranked, so while they have good potential, they are too weak for the main party. She shakes him, and he says if there were a character as good as Lily, he would have switched her already. Evangeline approaches them, asking where they are going, and Lily asks who she is. Taku introduces her to them. They all pay respects to her for her father. And she tells them, thanks, but she's fine. She asks where they are going, and Taku says to a dungeon, and she says dungeons don't exist around the city, then, asks if he means the dungeon under the lake, and she says it's just a fairy tale, and some treasure hunters would go to the lake, but nobody ever came back. Taku says they've already come back, and she says that there's a dungeon here that the Cross family didn't know about, and Taku's already been there, and if that's what he's claiming. Taku says her family might have known, and maybe it's just her who didn't. He tells her it doesn't matter if she believes or not, because they're going regardless. She says she wants to go too, and despite her looks, she's a top graduate, and if there's something under the house, she wants to see it. And that both of her parents died at the hands of the monsters from the lake, so she at least has the right to follow them. He thinks to himself that's why he wanted to leave her out of this, because it's what her father wanted. He asks if her feelings have calmed down, and she says, it feels worse to sit still, and it feels better to move around. She asks if he'll take her, and he says yes. Lily looks so happy, at the news, and he tells her to stay here, and she screams yes. Taku adds her to the party, and the new synergy gives everyone 20% increase in defense, and their morale doesn't decrease. Ader hands her some equipment, and Taku asks if everyone is ready. He starts to open the portal, and says he'll introduce the party on the way there, and that he'll show her the hidden landmark of her hometown. We see the party inside the dungeon, and they are back in the sewer. Lucas asks why they are here, and Taku says since they have a new party member, it's best to test teamwork in easy spot. Taku explains that after a defense round, the monsters in the dungeon respawn, so it's a good spot to grind for levels and gear, especially for the sub-party. The main party is meant to explore the dungeon and go into deeper areas while fighting bosses, and the sub-party is for farming, and that splitting roles like this is a basic strategy. And even if they are the main party, they have a new member. Evangeline asks Taku how he knew about this place, when she, a Cross family member, didn't. Taku says there's no way the Emperor sent him here without reason, right? And everyone believes him. Taku mentions how he doesn't know the Emperor, and just uses his title for explanations, and he thanks the Emperor. They go down the sewer, and Evangeline asks what's with the darkness. Taku tells her to get used to it, because the dungeon is covered in darkness. He teases her that she can go back if she's scared of the dark, and she says it's nothing. We see they have 4 rooms to clear, and they head down the sewer. The monster, this time, is revealed to be a stone golem, and it's revealed there are 4 of them. Taku says they are an annoying mob, and notices Evangeline is nervous, because she doesn't have a lot of real-life experience. Taku says it's time to test everyone's skills, and we see Evangeline saying she'll go first, and she blocks a golem's punch. We see her skill damage save activates, and she asks if it's normal for it to be so strong. She charges back in with her lance, and uses another skill called damage payback, and Taku is surprised. He explains that she saves the damage of her enemy's hit, and then releases the save damage with her second skill, and there's a limit to how much she can save. He says she's still a cheat, but we see her trip, and Taku is shocked, and calls for everyone to come to help her. We see the rest instantly kill 3 golems, and Evangeline asks for just 1 more. And Taku makes a joke that she's trying to make up for her failure. Taku says since everyone is warmed up, they can head to the second area, and to stay on guard. They arrive at the alleyway, and Taku says it's time to farm mana cores. We see them all resting under the dim light post, and Lucas and Evangeline compete on who can eat faster. Taku hands Damien a gun, and we learn he pulled the item from his last round of chests. He explains that only 1 person can use it, and that it's unstable and hard to aim, and this makes it unpopular. But if Damien uses it, then the problems are meaningless. Damien mentions it's heavy, and Taku thinks that Damien needs to get stronger, because he'll need to carry 5 to 6 of these at a time. He explains that in-game a character could only use 1 gun, but in reality, no one can stop him from using multiple guns. Damien thanks him, and Taku asks if everyone is rested, and they head to the next area. There are 4 rooms, and a boss room. They are proceeding cautiously, and Taku comments that the atmosphere is creepy, and just the thought of a house-sized golem appearing is terrifying. And guess what? It happens. Taku screams, and we see it's an elite mob, and there are 2 of them. One of them begins to punch down toward them, and Lucas says he'll stop it. Lucas cuts its hand, and Taku yells for him to be careful of the second one. We see it emerge from his side, and Evangeline says she'll go too. She blocks its punch, and Taku tells Jupiter and Damien to attack the golem Lucas is fighting. Taku says they are both sturdy knights, but if they compare roles, then Lucas is more of a damage tank, while Evangeline is a pure tank. But if it's endurance, then she is stronger. Taku tells her to take a defensive stance, and to stop it. And explains large monsters like golems are strong individually to balance their low numbers. And the one Lucas is fighting has an elite title, so a head-on fight is difficult. Taku tells Lucas to break its stance, and we see him dash in, slicing its leg. It falls to its knees, and he tells Jupiter to blow its armor off. She Pikachus it, and we see a crack form in the middle, and she says it wasn't enough, but Taku says it is. He tells Damien to pull the trigger, and he shoots the gun at the monster. The kickback of the gun makes him fall, and Taku catches him. Damien asks what happened, and he looks over to see the golem has a giant hole in his chest. Lucas says it was a tough opponent, and Taku explains elites are much stronger than a normal mob, and Taku says they can anticipate each fight will be an elite, so just treat them like boss fights. Evangeline asks if they are taking a break, because she isn't finished. Taku forgets she was fighting, and tells everyone to help her. Taku explains that continuing was easy. Anytime an alleyway seemed wider, steam engine golems appeared, and after a bit, they became easier to fight. He also got tent-tied by a mimic, and he wonders if they'll believe he fell into it on purpose, and everyone just laughs at him. We see Lucas climbing a wall, and he mentions that they can't go off the path because of the darkness, and Damien mentions that the buildings aren't an option either, because they are all blocked, and Jupiter says, they've also been sealed magically. Damien asks if the people inside did it to protect themselves from the outside, and Taku explains it was done from the outside, and it was to stop whatever was in the house from coming out. And Damien asks what's inside. Taku tells him he doesn't know, and they should continue. We see they have cleared 3 normal rooms, and have 1 more left, and the boss room. The next room is a giant plaza, with a fountain. Taku tells everyone to stay alert, and Evangeline points out all the water is dried up, but she can see a statue on the fountain. Taku wonders if it's a statue of the king, but wonders why the other 2 statues' heads are gone. Damien tells Taku he sees the light, and Taku tells everyone to approach with caution. And Taku says in a city of monsters, the only thing scarier than a monster is a person, because anyone who lives here isn't normal. He wonders if it's an enemy NPC or a helpful one, and that if they let their guard down, they will die. We learn the flame is fragments from defeated golems, and they see a figure. The person says since they are here, it seems like they are exploring pretty seriously, and we see it's Myung. They ask Myung what she is doing here. Taku thinks that although they met before, he's keeping his guard up since he's never met her in the last 742 times he's played. So he doesn't know if she is an ally or not. She says she's just taking a break since living in Lake Kingdom is tiring, and that if they came this far she should acknowledge them by showing them something. They all prepare themselves. We see her pull out a red bag, laying it out showing off hella goods. She says she sells quality goods for cheap. Taku is shocked that she is a merchant NPC. Me too, buddy. She says she doesn't know what an NPC is, but she is a merchant. She says she has a buy one get one event, as well as a 30% discount for their first purchase. She asks if they are going to buy it, showing off a chestplate. She says this type of service doesn't come often. Taku looks hesitant. He asks what she sells. She says these are all the items she's found while wandering around the Lake Kingdom. Taku and Jupiter begin to drool, while everyone else is shocked. Taku thinks that merchants normally have high quality items, but this shit is nuts. He asks how he should pay. She tells him magic stones or mana cores will work. Taku explains that magic stones are an item you can use for currency, as well as convert them into currency. Since he traded them all for money, he doesn't have any left. He didn't think he'd meet a merchant this early in the game. He tries to offer up some items they have collected while down here instead. She inspects them, saying they aren't worth much, but since it's his first time buying from her and she knows they are going to explore more, she will let them choose one item to show her support for their campaign. Taku calls her a saint, and begins to drool, saying no takebacks. He stares at the items, wondering what to choose. Jupiter holds up a ginseng, saying if she eats it she'll look younger. He thinks she should choose gear, not food, so she should buy it with her own money. Lucas holds up some boots, which have an increased speed option. He asks Lucas if he wants more speed, but Lucas says he was just thinking it'll be easier for Taku to escape from emergencies if he has them. Taku calls him a rascal for caring about him so much. He says no to the item since he isn't a main battle member. We see Damien eyeing a potion maker, saying if they put it in the temple they can heal the injured soldiers. Taku agrees, saying even if it's slow, it'll help a ton. But it's a waste to waste the free item on that. He asks Evangeline why she isn't choosing anything. She says she is only in the party temporarily and isn't really interested in the gear. Since she already has S-rank gear that's getting repaired, it's enough for her. Taku and Lucas make oh shit faces because they forgot they came here to cover the cost of repairs. Taku whispers to Myung, asking if she has any lances or shields. She says she luckily just got a set. She puts them out, and we see they are SSR rank with pretty good traits. Taku starts pogging out while looking at them. We see that they are a set, so when both of them are worn there's a new effect on top of their original ones. He wonders what to do since he can't just choose one. Myung sees this, reminding him she has a buy one get one free event, so he can just take both for no extra charge. She tells him it's a set, so take them as they aren't really useful to her anyways. Just make sure to keep exploring Lake Kingdom, and trade with her often. Taku tears up, comparing it to when a geared player helps a noob, and he will try his best. He tells Evangeline to come take it. He also decides to explain that her gear got broken when they fought. She says she's the one who started the fight, so it's her fault her gear broke, so he doesn't have to, but Taku interrupts her, saying it's a gift then. He equips her with it, confusing her. He says when an adult gives you a gift, just accept it. That this is a gift for graduating. And she won't reject a gift from a member of the royal family, right? He also thinks to himself he's just helping out the Chad Count's daughter, since he deserves a hero's praise, and he will be filled with guilt if he just leaves her gear broken. She thanks him, accepting the gear. Jupiter screams, asking about her gift. Taku says he pays her salary, but thinks he will give her a mage item when it appears. Lucas also asks. Taku thinks he has a whole equipment plan for him, so just wait. Damien says he is fine. Taku says he better be since he just gave him a hella expensive mana gun. Jupiter hands out a magic stone, telling Myung she wants the ginseng. We see her looking completely normal holding it, and Taku is confused that she had a stone with her. While Myung is packing up, Taku asks her if she knows the Pied Piper. She asks who that is. Taku explains he's a bard with a black coned hat, who can control monsters with his flute. He says there's a lot of freaks down here, but he's famous, so she recognizes him. Taku is surprised since he wasn't prominent in the game, but is famous here. Myung says if they keep going between area 3 and 4 there's a safe zone. She says it's the area where a lot of the sane people left in the kingdom go, They call it base camp. Taku recognizes the area from the game, describing it as a main hub where most of the NPCs are. Myung says there's a high chance Pied Piper is there, even if he isn't then he could gather information about him there. She turns around smiling, saying even though they still have a lot of way to go, they should have no problems getting there. She takes her leave saying she hopes they meet again. Damien says Myung is interesting, while Lucas says he doesn't trust her, because she is too strong. No one weak would have such a chill attitude after clapping all these golems. Taku thinks that after he works on Lucas for 3 years, leveling him up to the max he'd be able to do this easily too. But at the moment he understands why Lucas sees her as a monster, and he categorizes her as a friendly NPC. He says it's time to go fight the boss mob. We see a status window showing they've cleared all the normal rooms. We see them standing in front of an abandoned building with a hole in it, saying they don't know what's inside but the seal was useless. Damien and Evangeline ask if they should head back. Taku tells them they can't go back without seeing the boss mob. He wonders if it was a storage room because it's huge. Lucas recognizes moss on the floor and walls as if it was submerged for a while. Taku says they're under a lake so he isn't surprised. Damien, who's scared, starts pointing while calling out to Taku. We see a slumped over golem, and Tikus is confused, because it wasn't just a pile of rubble. We see it's a giant steam engine golem. Taku is surprised since it has a human name just like the Giga rat from the sewers. The golem begins to speak, saying oh no he fell asleep again, and turns over while its eye glows red. It says it's time to start cleaning again, while getting ready to blast at Taku and the gang. He shoots out his Iron Man beams. We see them flying towards everyone. Lucas and Evangeline deflect them. We see them fly towards a wall crashing into it. Jupiter recognizes it as light magic, commenting that it's rare to see. She asks Taku if he will be able to order a command. He says of course. Taku thinks that he was surprised because it was bigger than he expected, but he knows exactly how to fight against him, since he knows how to fight every enemy in the game. He shouts to not be intimidated because of his size, and he used the same strategy from the other golem they fought earlier. They just need to destroy the mana core. He says due to its size it'll have 10 mana cores in its body. Evangeline is shocked. Lucas asks if it'll keep fighting until they are all destroyed. Taku says yes, but any mana core that gets destroyed will shut that area down, and their first target will be the hands. Jupiter says she understands, while charging her lightning. Damien prepares himself saying he'll get the right hand. We see Jupiter, and Damien's attacks hitting the golem's hands successfully wounding them. Taku says the next target will be its feet. He commands Lucas and Evangeline to attack. The golem speaks saying its back aches these days. Wondering if it's because it's been sweeping all its life while rearing back its hand. Taku is shocked that it's attacking with its hand in that condition. We see they manage to dodge, as it shatters the ground sending rocks everywhere. Taku thinks its attacks are strong, but its movements are too big. Evangeline yells for the golem to stop mumbling. We see she hits its foot with her skill. Lucas thinks he can't fall behind, successfully attacking its other foot. The golem's feet break, causing it to collapse. It says one day he also wants to go to the Royal Academy and learn magic too, because he's sick of cleaning this place every day like a machine. I guess Buddy hasn't looked in a mirror in a while. Taku commands Evangeline to come back, while telling Jupiter and Damien to attack its right arm. We see them attack it, causing the arm to fall off. The golem says one day it'll invent cleaning magic to make the lives of fellow cleaners easier. We see they attack it again, completely destroying its arm and legs. The golem falls to the ground. Lucas approaches it, raising his sword, stabbing the mana core in the chest. Lucas tells Taku all that's left is the core in the head. The golem starts moving, causing Lucas to fall. The golem says he thought he already cleaned this area, while eyeing Taku. Taku thinks he can dodge quickly since he's just giving commands, but Damien and Jupiter can't. Taku grits his teeth, saying he just wanted to be carried while preparing a punch. We see he hit 125 on the jackpot, smacking the piss out of the golem, decapitating it. The golem's head lands in front of him. Taku thinks it's lucky that he got a good number. The golem's head starts to spark, and it says it's raining. Lucas holds up a sword telling Taku to get the final hit. Taku explains that boss kills give hella XP while walking towards it. He stands above it saying his level is the lowest in the party, so he should just take a free easy kill. The golem says it's raining immensely. Taku tells it to quit babbling, finishing it off. We see on the status screen they got a complete smash, 3 stars, for destroying all the golem's cores. We see everyone holding light sources looking around the room. Taku wonders how much XP he will get. Damien tells him they found a treasure chest and pathway. Taku says he'll be there soon, then calls out to Lucas to stop Jupiter from opening it. We see them playing as Taku opens the chest, saying it's an SR item. It's called the Orb of Scream, that has a pretty strong trait, but he's annoyed it's a mage item. Jupiter is drooling. He hands it to her, he says it matches Jupiter anyways. We then see it's part of a set called You Must Scream. Once all 3 pieces are equipped, it's an AoE fear. The chest also contained 2 SR mana cores. He tells them it's time to go home. We see Taku recognizes the area, and it's probably the stairs that connect the castle wall. He thinks everything is going well, and they're on good pace. After climbing the stairs for a bit, Jupiter complains while Damien is shaking. Kakis is also gassed out, saying they are almost there. They finally make it to the top, and they collapse. Jupiter says she's going to die of a heart attack, so she'll take one last hit of her cigar. Taku says Lucas and Evangeline work well together as they chug water. Taku says they made it while pointing to a door. Inside we see a teleport gate. Jupiter hauls cheeks towards it, saying she's going to take a hot bath, drink whiskey and enjoy her cigar. But she stops. Taku asks her what's wrong. Everyone is shocked. Taku says this is what Lake Kingdom actually looks like. We get another view of Yharnam, and we get to see how much more they have left to clear. Damien notices a light, saying he can see lights in some parts of the city. Taku thinks someone installed magic stones all around the city so the people surviving here can navigate around. Evangeline points to something, asking if it's a lighthouse. Taku looks anxious, saying it's the Lake Kingdom Palace, and it's the last area they will go to as it's where the final boss is. But for now they have a long way to go. We get another look at how far they are compared to the palace, as well as the route they took. He activates the teleporter, saying they should think about their next move. So let's head home for now. We see he gets 2 reward chests for completing an exploration, as well as everyone leveled up. Taku tells everyone to rest well, explaining that they started in the afternoon and returned in the evening. So they spent an entire day exploring. He yawns, saying he'll take a nap before finishing up some work. He opens his eyes, seeing he ended up sleeping too long. He decides to organize his inventory. He starts by pulling out a blue fire torch, saying it's inextinguishable. The item is good because dungeon explorations are always a battle against the dark, but that's about the only use it has. He is surprised he got a summoning scroll as the bonus for achieving a complete smash. The scroll summons the golem boss. It's a one-time use, but the skill is useful. He says there's no point waiting, learning the skill. He says he'll use it when he needs it. After organizing, we see his stomach is rumbling due to hunger. He arrives at the kitchen wondering if there's something to eat. We see some rats munching on some raw food, like freaks. Taku asks what they are doing. Evangeline says they are here because they are hungry. Taku says he is also hungry, asking if there's anything to eat. She says aside from what they just munched on, there's no cooked food, only ingredients. He asks if they are hungry. They both nod their heads. He tells them to wait at the table while he prepares food. They are surprised he knows how to cook. He thinks ramen with some kimchi is a good late-night snack, but it'd be impossible to make here. Looking at the ingredients, he says he has an idea, pulling out the blue torch, lighting the fire. He puts butter in the pan, and goes to town. He tells them they should eat and sleep. We see he made royal prince toast. He thinks it's not bad, but he wishes they had condiments. Lucas starts crying, saying it's so good that Taku could replace the royal chef. Evangeline says it's similar to food they sell at festivals. He says it's pretty accurate since it's a street food recipe. Evangeline says this reminds her of when she was younger. She'd hear sounds in the kitchen, and when she walked in she would see the Count just chowing on food he quickly made, since monsters can attack at any given time. She says he'd always come back bloodied and dusty. Then he would just dump whatever ingredients he found into a pan. But after noticing her, he'd always ask the same question: if she wanted to eat some too. Taku sighs, asking if she'd eat it too. She says of course, that's why her cheeks are so round. Taku says it's cute and makes her look more childlike. She says after eating like that her mom would wake up, scolding her dad for feeding her so late at night. She laughs, remembering the expression he'd make. Then stops, saying just doing this late at night reminded her of those nights. Taku tells her the Count's funeral is tomorrow, and if she wants she could lead the funeral tomorrow. She says she'd rather have Taku take care of it, because although she respects her dad, she can't forgive him. She asks if the Count ever told Taku how her mom died, saying the Count left her and her mom to die while he protected the city. She could never forgive his choice, but understood his reasoning since protecting the city is the Lord's first responsibility. The day her mom was buried, her dad didn't come, since he had to prepare for another attack. She realized as she buried her mom's empty coffin in her father's place, that this was what the head of the Crossroad family has to be like. And she can't be that person. Taku says then that was why she left. She says yay and thanks him for preparing the Count's funeral. She repeats that while she respects the Count, she can't forgive him as her father. She quickly thanks them while getting up from the table, saying it was an honor to be served by the prince himself. Taku thinks having a family is difficult, while Lucas doesn't say anything. While heading back, Lucas asks if Taku is alright, confusing him. Lucas says that Taku has a complicated relationship with his family too, so that's why he is helping Evangeline. Taku makes what face.png since he thought he was just a playboy. Lucas continues saying he must be seeing his past self in her, and while he knows he might be dull, he can tell that much. He asks Taku if he is wrong. Taku thinks he can't tell if Lucas is asking because he is sincerely worried, or if he suspects he isn't the real Ash. He couldn't respond due to his body freezing. Taku thinks Lucas feels like a stranger right now, and says he doesn't know how to respond. He thinks while Ash is the Emperor's son, he's sure his family life wasn't simple, but he doesn't know anything about Ash's family. He starts to stutter, and Lucas apologizes saying it must have been a sensitive question. Taku says that's not it, and just thinking about it suddenly made him space out a bit. Lucas says his and Evangeline's family lives will all be resolved in the end while giving off golden retriever energy. Taku wonders if he was thinking about it too deeply. They say goodnight to each other. Back in his room, Taku is still scared, wondering about Ash's family problems. He says the conversation made him remember he's in someone else's body. The next day we see the repairs on Crossroad have begun, as well as information about Stage 3. It's a lot of golems since that's what they fought while exploring. He says they only have a few large monsters, but they are all elites, and they have around a week, so he will try to prepare really well this time. Prepare so well that even if things changed unexpectedly they'd be fine. So strong they will be able to destroy the source of the unexpected change. We see Taku kindly telling all the production people what to do. At the Count's funeral, he says there were some people injured last stage, but only one person died. The Count. Lucas tells him the casket is on the way, so they should get ready. We learn they took the casket around town, since it's the death of the Lord who ruled for decades. And even if the city is insensitive towards death, many citizens mourned. He says the funeral will be held here, but the casket is going to be cremated in the Count's orchard, since that's where his wife is. Taku stands above everyone attending the funeral, saying last time he called their deaths expensive, and he meant that literally. Especially the Count's death, it was beyond a monetary loss, as it pains his heart. We see Lily crying. Taku continues saying the Count asked him to provide the citizens with more happiness since they can't move on with sadness alone. Since this place is a fort city, death will always be present. So it must be ruled with hope and happiness instead of sadness. But today he will disobey the Count's last words, because he will be sad. The front line is maintained by the sacrifice of precious people, not just the Count but everyone who loses their life. He wants them to remember, their sacrifice is worth as much pain as it causes. Because every sacrifice helps them survive. He tells them to remember, as he will always repeat himself. People are going to continue dying, but those deaths won't be in vain. He says they will now have a moment of silence for those who helped them so far. While everyone is quiet, he thinks that he hopes one day the city will be full of endless festivals rather than funerals. Just like the Count wanted. After the ceremony they shot fireworks, and transported the Count's casket to his house. One of the people delivering it are shocked to see Evangeline. They apologize to her. She asks if she could check the casket. We see her hand shake as she says he always fought at the front, as if he couldn't die, but here he is. She tells them that's enough, and we see them bury the casket. They ask her about the Count's gear, and she recognizes it. The man says it's the equipment passed down the Cross family for generations. They wanted to bury it with him but are asking her in case she wants it. She thinks about it, then tells them to bury it next to her dad. Taku stands in front of the graves, saying built up a wall with snow and ice. Here on earth is the path of compassionate life. He says it was the Count's favorite poem. He prepared it thinking it would fit well with the Count, but not during the funeral program, so he waited. He recalls the Count telling him that he will have to sacrifice something important to protect the city eventually, causing him to wonder what he will lose in the future. Evangeline approaches saying she didn't know he had a hobby of reciting poems. He says he waited to read it since it doesn't fit with his image, but she caught him. She says he has a good voice, so next time he should read it loudly. He asks if she is okay. She says of course, as it was bound to happen one day. And if she were to get hired as a knight on another battlefront she could never return, and it's a miracle she even made it to his funeral. Taku asks if she plans on leaving. She says of course since she can't stay here. She plans to take care of all the inheritance matters, sell the property and leave. He realizes she had her heart set from the start, that's why she buried the passed down gear. He tells her to let him help her set everything up. She asks if he's not going to stop her. Because she is throwing away her family's legacy and running away so she can live comfortably. He says he doesn't know if he will do as well as her family, but he'll protect the battlefront the best he can. So not to worry and have fun, he will do his best to make sure her family's hard work doesn't go to waste. She says the rumors about him are really different than how he is. Since she figured he'd be trying his best to return to the palace if he was relegated here. But she's surprised at how seriously he takes his job of being the Lord. He sighs saying someone told him they'd reward him for protecting this place, so that's why he is working hard. Recalling the memory of Ader telling him he'd grant any wish. It's not because he's a saint, he's selfishly wanting to fulfill his personal wish. We hear something loud, quickly asking what that sound is, assuming it's an attack. We see it's Evangeline's stomach rumbling. He says it's more like thundering instead of rumbling. She asks him for food, saying what he made yesterday was yummy. He laughs thinking the survivors must eat and continue living. He tells everyone they are heading back. While thinking even though the dead are buried the living must continue moving forward. Taku says after that day he worked on 2 tasks at the same time. We see Lily is really happy to see him. His tasks were preparing for the next stage, and settling the Cross family fortune. Since Lily didn't want to be the front count because she wanted to leave, it would be better to gather her family's fortune and give it to her. That way she doesn't have a reason to come back to Crossroad. Ader looks down that he is okay with letting Evangeline go, saying he'll liquidate all of the Cross family's assets. As well as settling the inheritance process. Ader says selling it all within a week might be impossible, since most of the family's fortune is real estate, so waiting for someone to purchase it will take a bit. Taku says to buy it in his name for now, since he wants everything to be done within a week so Evangeline can leave. All of the Cross family have died here, making her the last survivor. So at the very least he wants her to be safe. As that was the Count's final wish. Ader says he understands, and Taku compliments him. We see there's 8 days until stage 3 starts. Taku says he will prove that you can beat the game without wasting people's lives. A week later in the blacksmith's shop, we see the workers apologizing since they couldn't make the amount of mana guns he requested in time due to their complexity. He tells them it's fine since he understands. He thinks about the history of mana guns, and that they are fairly new. They require an alchemist and blacksmith to work together, making it extra difficult. Taku asks how many they were able to make. We see they only made 2 guns. Taku is shocked, because one of the guns is SSR ranked. The weapon insta-kills if the user is proficient. The alchemist and blacksmith look proud, saying they made it using the special mana core from the Spider Queen. He comments on the gun being a balance breaker, since it could hard carry for a year at least. And since Damien is using the gun, it's the perfect weapon for him to pump out damage. Taku starts laughing while shit-talking the game. They tell Taku the entire time making it felt like a trance, and they are glad he is happy with it. We see the other gun is normal, it even has a flaw. The flaw makes it less accurate when spam fired. He tells them they did a great job, and will make sure they get paid well. Lucas asks if the gun is that impressive. Taku says it'll change the course of the war. We see that they have 20 hours left. Taku says that should be enough time for Damien to get used to it. We see Taku getting off a carriage. Lucas tells him he should see something. We see Evangeline in front of his house. He says her name, but she doesn't respond. She says Ader gave her something, holding an envelope. Taku thinks that after adding up all their property she has enough money to live leisurely. She thanks him for handling her issues so fast, and says Ader told her something after giving her the paper. She makes a spot on Ader impression, repeating what he said, after you get the money you'll have no more business in the city so pack your bags and leave ASAP. She says Ader kicked her out, asking if Taku really ordered him to do so. Taku says he did. She asks why is he wanting her to leave so fast, she didn't even get to say goodbye. He tells her if she's going to leave then don't drag it out, since tomorrow will be a war zone. Does she intend to get caught up in it too? She tries to say something, but he tells her to shut up and leave since she has no more connections to Crossroad anymore. She says since he helped her, she plans to return the favor. Taku sighs saying no, because she already plans to leave so don't get this dirt on herself. And that he can protect the city well enough without help from a kid. She says that he saw her fight, so he knows she can pull her weight. He yells out her name, scaring her. He says she is the one who abandoned her hometown to live a new life, that's why she gave up her position, cleaning out her inheritance. Removing all her roots from Crossroad. She tries to speak again, but he continues. That if she made up her mind, then act like it to leave and not look back. Because it's as she said, the battlefront is just full of death, and if you step into it, you can't leave. He tells her to never get herself into wars against monsters, and to do something else she wants to do. He tells her that the Count's last wish was for her to live free, while doing whatever she liked. She looks shocked. He mentions how she said she wanted to be a bad daughter, doing the opposite of what her parents wanted, but at least she should listen to her father's last wish. He walks past her saying that she is now an outsider. She tries to stop him, but he says they have to discuss tomorrow's defense so she should leave. She starts to yell thanking Taku, saying she's going to visit her parents' graves one last time then leave. She bows saying she hopes his future is full of nothing but victories. He hopes luck also stays in her life too, but doesn't say it out loud. He melts onto the floor, and Lucas tells him that he doesn't need to be so strict. Taku says if he didn't do that she would always have lingering feelings towards Crossroad. Lucas says he could have been nicer about it. We see Evangeline sigh while looking back. Taku says not all farewells require tears, and gold is enough. Taku cries saying goodbye to his SSR ranked cheat character. He quickly gets over it, telling Lucas they should do their best from now on. Taku opens a door asking if they all rested well. We see Jupiter, Damien and Lily who decided to come on her own. She looks super happy because she can't wait to go out again. Taku starts to make a goofy face asking if she enjoyed her freedom. She shakes him while begging for him to let her be free. A bit later we see Jupiter consoling her, while Taku says they have less than a day so they need to go over their strategy one last time. He gives Damien the OP mana gun saying it's a gift. He starts to tell Damien about it, but a knight bursts through the door. He yells that a scout reported the monsters are coming, their army is around 200 golems and they are hauling cheeks towards the city. Taku says that's nonsense. His amulet begins to glow. We see a status window saying someone is interfering with the game. The stage 3 status window starts to speed up. We now see they have only 30 minutes. Taku says the game can't troll him like this. The knight says that's not all. They also split into 2 groups. 80% are headed towards the city while 20% are going straight towards the front Count's orchard. Taku and Lucas are shocked, because Evangeline is currently there. We see knights hurriedly preparing. One of them rings something to alert everyone. Taku approaches asking what's their current position. The scout says they can see them without the magnifying scope. We see a horde of golems coming. Taku is shocked, saying while they fought them in the dungeon seeing this many is scary. He compares it to a wall, while we see them marching towards the city. Taku asks when the golems will reach the cannon's range. He says at this rate less than 15 minutes. He tells them to get them ready to fire. Lucas approaches asking if he's going to leave Evangeline alone. Taku looks perplexed, gritting his teeth in frustration because the stage started too early, and the fact they split up into 2 groups. He wonders why this is all happening now. He realizes there has to be another being controlling the situation with malicious intent. The Count's troops tell him they heard the news about Evangeline, and to send them to her. He pleads that the current front line is strong even without them, so send them to the orchard. Another one of the men says the monsters are getting closer, so they need to go now. Taku says there's 2 issues with their words. The first error is the fact the cannons aren't even ready, and a lot of the soldiers are new recruits, so does he really think they can defend with just new soldiers? The second error is their claim that they can rescue Evangeline. Since it's an orchard there aren't any defenses, even if there were they'd get diffed. So how could they possibly rescue Evangeline alone? He explains that the reason this game was able to work as a defense game was because of the wall, and fighting without the wall is the same as throwing away their lives. The soldier says even if they were to all die, they want to save her. But Taku yells saying that's not a viable plan. Everyone stays quiet for a bit, then Taku sighs saying he wants a viable plan. Not them just throwing their lives away. He asks what Taku is planning since she will die if they don't help her. Taku thinks about it, saying the soldiers are right, without help she will die. But to save her he'd need to send his elite party, which would be all the main members, and they'd have to use the soldiers as meat shields, but at that point even if she was saved it's GG. He recalls the Count's words about whether to save his wife, or protect the citizens. Saying he understands some of the Count's pain. He tells them that they will not go rescue her, they can't waste any more manpower, because they need all forces to focus on the battlefield. He thinks there was no need to hesitate, it's one life against the many. He tells them if the walls fall, all the citizens will die, also putting humanity at risk. So the front line must be maintained. If the game were to end, it doesn't matter if he saved or lost Evangeline. He says he will reiterate, not a single person will be a part of the rescue team. At the orchard we see Evangeline talking about how the orchard shows traces of someone taking care of it. She realized she would never see this orchard again. After she left, her father took care of this place alone, hoping the next season would bring good fruit, but he knew that would never happen. She compares the orchard to a ruin. Her parents died and now she is leaving. It was a ruin in the past, and shall remain one too. She says the ending of the Cross family who protected this land for hundreds of years was pathetic. Nothing was left besides death and dust. The last family member is running away without putting up a fight. She calls out to her parents, saying she is going far away, and while she has a lot on her mind she can't remember anything. She felt dizzy, and the ground felt as if it were shaking. She says goodbye, smiling, wiping away her tears in front of their grave. She braces herself, then turns around saying it's time to get going. But we see a golem hauling cheeks towards her. She is shocked, it hits her sending her flying. We see her coughing up blood. We see Evangeline having a flashback of her talking to her mom. She's asking her mom when she has to go to the battlefront, since the heir of the Cross family has to go. Her mom is shocked. She says the fate of the Cross family is sad. Evangeline asks if she didn't know if it'd be like this, worrying about the Count every time he fought, and the fact that she has to fight when she grows up too. Her mom says she knew that she'd spend every night crying whenever the monsters invaded. And if she gave birth to her, then she'd have to fight out there too. Evangeline asks why she married the Count, and had her then. Her mom smiles saying, maybe to continue something. She still couldn't understand what her mom meant. She thought she would never be able to understand. We see her coughing up blood, wondering how long she was unconscious for. But realizes it probably wasn't that long since the golem is walking toward her. She wonders why there is a golem here, and her body reacts before her mind, causing her to leap for her gear. She notices the monster's attack, and we see it send her flying into the Count's house, leaving rubble everywhere. We see she withstood the attack since she blocked in time. She says this has to be a joke, since the golem is destroying her house without permission. She prepares herself, but we see two more golems burst into the house. She is shocked. We see her put her shield up, blocking one of the golem's attacks while she pierces the other one. But she realizes she can't block the attack in front of her. We see her sent flying, crashing into the wall. She stands back up, then leaps towards the golem, saying that's enough. She jumps onto the golem's arm, piercing its eye. She then leaps towards another one, piercing through its arm, landing behind it. She stands up, feeling lightheaded. We see her struggling to stand. She thinks she needs to go back and alert Crossroad of the ambush, but once she stands in the hole left earlier, she is confused. She sees the main horde of golems, and realizes that the three golems were nothing but scouts. Because this is the real army. She turns around knowing she has to escape, but her horse is gone. She decides to run to Crossroad, wondering if it's possible with her leg being wounded. She starts running thinking she just has to make do. Since this is the only time she can gain some distance, we see a flying golem thing above her. It starts to cast some magic. She tries to grab her shield, but trips over her feet, due to her clumsy trait. She says out of all times, why another mistake now? We see a huge explosion land beside her. She was able to shield in time, but is heavily wounded. She helplessly looks at the golems, and flying one. Quickly realizing that it's over. She says there's still so many things she hasn't done yet. She never dated, got drunk, and she isn't even an adult. She wasn't sad or angry, just full of regret. She squeezes some dirt and begins crying. Wishing she could do more. We see someone say then do it. She opens her eyes. We see Ticus red cape. He tells her she just has to do everything she wants one by one. Since life is short, she needs to spend it without regrets. She is shocked, calling out to him. We see him standing in front of her. He turns around saying he came to save her. We are taken back to 30 minutes ago at Crossroad. Everyone is shocked because he told them he will go save Evangeline alone. Lucas yells at him asking what he is talking about, because he said the rescue mission wasn't viable yet, he's going to go himself. He tells them to calm down because he isn't going to die, as he has a way to win. Taku thinks that the most unpredictable character in this game is him, so he alone should be the one to go, and taking extra people will increase their losses. He says he has some emergency strategies prepared, and he has no choice but to gamble a little. Taku says if they've been under his command they should be aware that he knows a lot about the monsters, and his plans have always been successful. And that he has a plan this time too, so trust in him. Lucas is hesitant, but Taku tells him there's no time left, so he will be in charge while he leaves. Lucas says he would rather save Evangeline, but Taku tells him they have their individual roles. Lucas yells saying for us, because they need him. He tells Lucas to trust his decision, promising he will come back safe and sound, while putting his hand on Lucas's shoulder. Taku realizes that abandoning her would be abandoning his morals he set when coming here. Save anyone that can be saved. He tells Lucas this is the only way to save her, while protecting the battlefront. He tells Lily and Jupiter they should know what to do as mages. They tell him to not worry and come back safely. He tells Damien he has a request of him. We see they open the south gate and Taku leaves on horseback while Lucas watches. Taku calls Lucas a dog, telling him to protect the house since he will be back. We see Lucas acknowledge it. Taku looks determined while thinking after all the sacrifices the front count's family has made he will protect her no matter what. We are now back to the present. He hands her a potion telling her to drink. She tells him he can't be here, and he needs to leave. Because they have no chance against the Golem army. She tries to shove him away saying she will buy time, so run back to Crossroad. Taku thinks it's too late to run, since they will blast them with magic. And 2 of the 5 magic golems came this way. We see on the status window it's an elite mob, so pretty much a boss monster. Evangeline stands in front of Taku asking if he wants to die here. Taku tries to speak but she keeps going, saying she's an orphan now, but he is the count, so for the citizens please leave. He shoves the potion in her mouth while she is talking. He tells her to just drink and recover. He turns around saying the line he told her earlier about relying on adults and it's okay to act like a kid. He thinks he's been waiting for this moment. He's always wanted to yell loudly using this, while putting his hand in the air. He hits us with a Pokemon line, saying come out Golem. We see a magic circle appear above them, lightning begins to spark around it as we see the Golem's head. It leaps out of the portal into the air, crashing onto the ground in front of them. Evangeline is shocked, and Taku says saving her was worth it all for that reaction. We see Taku move his hand, the Golem follows. A status window appears saying the boss monster is under his control. He notices it has a lot of functions. One of the mage golems starts preparing an attack. Taku notices it. We see it launching attacks towards the golem. He commands the golem to block it. The golem prepares a shield in front of it, blocking all of the attacks. Evangeline is surprised. He tells her it's his lottery ticket. He explains that it's the boss monster summon magic he learned earlier, and he figured he would save it since it's a one-time use, but at least it has a lot of functions. We see the golem mages start descending. The golems start to rush in. Taku thinks since magic is working they are going to try and use brute force. He tells the golem to intercept them. We see Golem Bro start to shine. It starts hauling cheeks, cracking the floor. We see the other golems also charging at him. Golem Bro leaps into the air above the army. Taku yells that this is his cheat code. We see the golem crashing into them, causing a lot of them to break into smaller pieces. He explains the monsters are sorted into 3 types: normal, elite and boss monsters. Aside from the levels, the monsters are difficult for humans to face. Even so, boss monsters are in a whole nother league compared to the other 2 groups. They are far more intelligent than normal mobs. They are able to give commands. They are the strongest presence in the army. We see Golem Bro preparing an attack. Smacking the piss out of golems, he picks one up, ripping it in half while Taku says it feels like cheating. We see the other monsters begin climbing on top him, slowly but surely overwhelming him. Taku compares it to hyenas attacking a lion. He says although monsters have the basic nature of prioritizing humans, they are sensitive about traitors. We see the golem yeet one off its arm. While Taku continues thinking no matter how strong a boss mob is, there's no way it can take down 50 monsters alone. He says it's like a praying mantis getting swallowed by a swarm of spiders. He thinks it's not like he expected it to kill all the boss monsters anyways. He tells Evangeline they should escape while Golem Bro is keeping them busy. He asks her about her leg. We see it's hella beat up, but she says she can walk, but running will be hard. He gives her a health potion saying they should run then. We see him pouring it over her wounds. He asks her if it's better now. She says she's fine now. They start running away. He tells her he tied a horse to the north. We see the magic golems start floating again. Then charging their attack. Evangeline points it out to Taku, and we see the normal golems have also caught up to them. Taku says they won't let them leave easily. The magic missiles start flying towards them. She tells Taku to duck, putting the shield over him. We see she blocked the attacks. He tells her good job, but she hurt his back, making him go to her height. She gets upset, asking why he has to be tall. He laughs, thinking it's fun to banter. We see he commands Golem Bro to beat the magic golems. Golem Bro looks up towards them, then extends his hand. We see him block one of their attacks and grabs the other like a toy. Now they shouldn't be attacked by magic for a bit. Now the only problem is the normal golems. We see Evangeline leaping backwards into the air towards the golem. She prepares an attack, piercing the golem's chest from above. Taku claps, saying that was cool. She gets shy, saying don't suddenly compliment her, and asks about the horse. We see Taku point to a tree where the horse is tied. The horse makes a shocked face, and tries to run away. Taku tells it to wait, but we see magic fly behind him. It hits the tree, letting the horse escape. We see the magic golem was able to cast a spell, while the golem is holding it. Taku calls it persistent. Evangeline asks if there's another way to escape. He tells her it's time for Plan B. She asks what Plan B is. He asks her what she thinks. They have to defeat them all. The golem starts to punch, and he tells her it's do or die anyways. She starts rushing and preparing her lance. We see her block the golem punch. Taku tells her to only focus on defense, and use her lance when her damage save skill is full. She asks who is going to attack then. He says he will. We see the jackpot hit 172. He punches the golem in half. He says like this. She is shocked, asking how his prince punch works. He says how, with nothing but the mercy of the god of chance, while giving a golem a low blow. Two of them start running at them. He tells her to beat the one on the right with her skill and block the other. We see Evangeline doing just that. Taku explains that when you play these games, relying on luck will always result in failure. He dashes in, hitting the golem. We see the jackpot spin. He hits a nat 0, thinking probability always betrays the player. He is shocked. We see his hand is all bloodied. Taku explains that a person who wants to win shouldn't rely on luck. Attacks must be made with a surefire conviction. Even though he knew this, he kept trying to hit a jackpot. It's always been his principle to use any means possible. The result is a fumble, the worst possible roll. He screams in pain due to his hand. When you fumble, the attacker receives hella damage instead. Evangeline calls out to him, but he tells her it's fine. He expected this. We see him open a health potion, pouring it on his arm. He says it hurts like hell since it closes the skin, and fuses broken bones. He tells Evangeline to buy him around 10 seconds, she tells him there's no time as we see the golems rushing in. She blocks them, while Taku starts messing with his inventory. We see him pull out the George Washington blicky, saying he had this in case his luck ran out. We see magic begin to charge at the end, and he deletes 3 of the golems, creating a huge hole in them. Evangeline is really shocked. He tells her it's his second lottery ticket. We learn it's the mana gun he was supposed to give to Damien, but he yoinked it in a hurry. He thinks since his left hand is smashed he'll finish them off with the gun. We see him blast another one. He explains that mana guns are really hard to handle, however since he is point blank, even with a weak body, bull's eyes are still possible. He says the recoil is comparable to a cannon, saying he feels sorry for Damien. Evangeline says it's the last one. We see her use her skill, destroying the golem. Taku sits down in relief. She says she has a lot of questions to ask, but for now we'll only ask one. They stare at Golem Bro fighting the rest of the army. She asks what to do now. He tells her that he already told her that they will kill them all. He says they need to go back to the Count's house, since he has a few more insurances over there, and if they are going to live they have to kill them all since they will chase them. We see Golem Bro has been taken down. Taku tells it good work while opening a status window. He says it's time for the function he cared most about since summoning him. He tells Golem Bro to self-destruct. We see its eye glow red, then it explodes while Taku and Evangeline watch. She says she doesn't have the strength to be shocked. Taku thanks the golem, then says F in the comments for Golem Bro. Taku thinks it'd have been nice if all the monsters died from that, but he checks his map to see there's 14 left. We see the golems trying to get up. Taku tells her they need to run to the house before they get up. We see them running while magic gets cast at them. Evangeline prepares herself. We see her block the attack. She says the most annoying one is alive. Taku agrees, saying that's how it goes. She notices there's only one, so they probably killed its friend. We see it in pieces on the floor while Taku berates it for attacking the horse. As they approach the house, Evangeline notices another magic attack. She blocks it, but her shield cracks. Then we see it shatter into pieces as the durability ran out. The golem continues its barrage. We see her prepare her lance. Taku compliments her quick thinking, but says the lance isn't for defense as it also begins to shatter. More attacks continue to come. She pushes Taku out of the way. He calls out to her, but she tells him she is fine, and they should continue to the house. We see them running into the hole earlier. She asks what the plan is now, since he said he had won to turn the situation around right. He reaches into his pocket telling her to trust him. He says he isn't a knight in shining armor, but he's pretty good at swindling. We see a top quality mana core from earlier. He yeets it towards the golems while summoning the automatic defense turret. It starts to float while he mentions the ingredients for crafting. We see it begin to collect the nearby resources from the house. We see it finished crafting. The golem is shocked. The turret faces towards the golem, blasting it. Taku cheers it on as it just bombards them. He asks if they really think he'd die here. He realizes the golems have stopped attacking, and he's curious as to why they are so smart, since just mindlessly running should be their default. He decides it's not a big deal, and is just happy he's getting a break, then tells Evangeline they are deactivated. Then she pours another potion onto her arm, and asks him what's next. He says to wait for sunset. Once it does, he'll get his other insurance. We see that Evangeline's shoulder still hurts, and Taku wonders if maybe there's a limit to how much potions can heal. He tells her he'll check for a bandage, so wait here. He finds some in a drawer, then bandages her up. She thanks him, then asks why there's so much alcohol, since it reeks. He tells her it's because the front count was an alcoholic. She's surprised, and he asks if she didn't know. She says no way, that her father never drank alcohol. Since he believed that the monsters could invade at any time, he needed to stay focused, so didn't drink a sip. Taku thinks about it, then tells her he guesses a lot of things changed while she was gone, and that he was so tormented, he couldn't last a day without alcohol. She's surprised by this. He asks if she still hates her father. She says yes. Taku tells her that if her father went to save her mother instead of the city, would she have forgiven him then? She says that she wouldn't hate him like she does now. He reminds her she was in the city, so if he went to save her mother, she would have been in danger. So her father didn't abandon her mother, he protected her and she knew. She looks regretful, but admits he's right. She says she knows he always did his best, but who should she hate? She says her mother was ripped apart by monsters, and her anger and sadness was driving her insane. And that there's no need to hate monsters, since they are just considered a disaster. So should she blame? She says she knows it's selfish, but she wants to blame someone for all of this, since if she doesn't it feels like her insides will burn into ashes. He says he understands what she's thinking, since she can't blame the monsters, since it's easier to hate someone than to forget sadness. She says her dad accepted her hatred, since he blamed himself too. So she never hesitated on hating him, but now he's telling her to forgive him. So what does he want her to do? Whose fault is it if not her father's? He says it's nobody's fault, since they are all just trying to live on. Since nobody has any ill intent, they are just struggling to survive. But with the monsters invading, everyone is dying, friends, family, comrades. It's inevitable since humans are weak, so they need to place blame in order to live. He puts his hand on her head, and tells her to hate him. He'll take the blame in place of her father. He's now the Lord of Crossroad. He is responsible for the place. If it's a burden the Crossroad family carried, it's only obvious he should inherit this burden. He tells her to try and understand her father a bit, as he only wanted her to be happy. He then messed up her hair, and he tells her he's doing all of this to save her. She blushes while looking at him, and starts to say something, but they get interrupted by the building shaking. She then looks outside, to see they are surrounded. Taku says it's because the golems realize the weakness of the turret, so they are actually smart. He quickly tells Evangeline that if they come in at once they'll all die. She asks about her weapons, then he tells her she buried them a few days ago. She realizes what he means, and says no way. The golems then start hauling Stony Cheeks towards them. The turret quickly starts to aimbot, and rapid fire toward them. But while it's firing in one direction, they quickly take its side, and start to rockpile atop it, causing it to explode, taking the Geodudes out with them. Taku and Evangeline take this chance to create some space, but the golems notice them and start to pursue. He tells her to keep running, then shoots a few of the golems. He tells her just a bit more till his final insurance. She keeps running, then makes it to the back of the orchard, and kneels before her parents' graves. Taku then calls out to her, and we see the boys are right behind him. She starts to dig through the ground. She eventually ends up hitting a wooden box, which has the weapons of her father inside of them, which were also the weapons she requested be buried with her father. She looks regretful, but equips them anyways and readies herself. She recalls her father giving her the weapons, but realized she accidentally dropped them, but was too embarrassed to apologize. She wondered if he'd bark at her, but he didn't. Rather, he gave her words of endearment as she left, and his voice trembled as he told her to come back anytime she wanted. She didn't respond to him and left. As her father stood there waiting, even as she got far away, he continued to stand there. Even as she disappeared, she looks at the worn-out weapons, and remembers how cool her father looked to her when she was a kid. She grips her lance, and reality set back in. She wondered what was going on. Then she saw Taku's goofy ass running from the mobs. She asks if he has the second insurance, to which he says yes. She says to use it, and he says that he's already doing that. Then he puts his hand on her shoulder, saying it's right here, she is his insurance. He tells her to do her best, take her father's weapons and fight the way she was taught. She wanted to say something, but instead readied herself for the golems. She squeezed her weapons, which fit her hands perfectly, and she recalled her father showing her how to hold them. An aura began to emanate from her as she held onto them, and one of the golems rushed in at her. She recalls her father's exact words as she prepares the lance. She feels her father supporting her. Then one shots the golem, but the rest continue charging in. She does the same thing back to them. Then wonders if she's hallucinating, as she dodges one of their attacks. She says their movements seem slow, then one shots another. She knew exactly where and when to step, and instinctively went through the golems, following a path that she felt was there. She continues absolutely munching the golems, then is surprised by what she just felt. Taku claps his hands, saying she did great. Then she asks him what that path she saw was. He explains how it's because the weapons were made for her and the characteristics work without upgrades. She's lost since he's speaking in Nerj, but she ultimately decides he knows what he's talking about. He clears his throat saying they have more important matters currently, then points up to the last golem. Coincidentally, it points back at him, and she asks what to do. He says she has no ranged weapons, and his mana gun is empty, but there is always a way since he has other cards. He explains that it's about to be night, and tells Evangeline it's her last order. He tells her to just run straight at it, as he'll drop it for her. She says okay, then rushes at it. Without even questioning, she believes in him. It begins to attack her, but she begins to feel the path again, quickly evading the attacks. He tells her good job, then says with this it's checkmate, yeeting a torch towards the golem. It completely misses, and they awkwardly stare at each other. Evangeline's mental checks out. Then we see a muzzle flash from the castle wall. The shot rips the golem arm off, and she is surprised that it came all the way from Crossroad. It then gives us a flyby over the battlefield, taking us to where the shot came from, to which we see our boy Damien with the George Washington blicky. She says that's not possible. But Taku quickly tells her that it's irrelevant, and to take this last chance and finish the golem, she rushes at it, then leaps into the air while screaming, then stabs it in the chest, causing it to explode. She does a superhero landing. Then drops to her knees. Taku walks up and pats her head, saying she did great. And they finish the fight on their end, as they defeated 50 golems. She calls him amazing, saying it's crazy. He tells her that it is unbelievable, but they can leave it as their war. She leans onto him, asking if she can faint, and he tells her to go ahead and sleep, and she continues to lean onto him as he begins to sing her a lullaby. Later at night, Taku waves the torch back and forth, and receives 3 flashes back from Crossroads, which indicates the battle was successful. He's glad that both sides won, then looks over at Evangeline, saying they really passed their limits today. He says he had 2 insurances left, one was Damien's shot, and the distance was only possible due to him being a cheat character. This one shot must have strained him quite a bit, so he'll praise him when he gets back. But Evangeline was his final insurance, rather her equipment was. We see that it's at low durability, but it's strong as hell when she uses it. Each SSR character has their own equipment, it's usually connected to their story, and has personal characteristics. This is what separates the SRs from the SSRs, it makes all the difference. The path she found was an ability named Crossroads, which is due to all of the past experiences of the Cross family. It's a buff that gives her double battle efficiency, but it can't be maintained for long. Taku also explains how in the game once a character's loyalty is maxed the set equipments come automatically. He almost screamed when they buried it, and he left it alone because he was going to send her away, but he was desperate so needed it. He hopes the Count wouldn't be angry, since it was to save his daughter's life. Taku complains about his wrist, hoping the city is okay. He says they are probably taking care of the remaining golems, but they'll be fine so it's time to rest. He closes his eyes, and falls asleep. He recalls a memory of his past, and we see inside of a hospital room a kid laying on the bed, then Taku jolts awake, realizing he's been covered up. Evangeline is glad he's awake, then he asks if she feels better. She says she'll be fine, but what about him? He says since he beat 50 golems he feels great. She tells him not to act so tough, and as the night continues, she asks if they need to spend the night here. He tells her probably, they can only head back once they are done in the city. She says she hopes they are okay, and he says they'll be fine. Then they hear growling, and Taku turns around wondering if it's another enemy, but Evangeline says she's just hungry. His stomach rumbles too, and he says that he's also hungry. He walks away, but comes back and brings back the dried fruit from the Count, and some alcohol. She asks what kind of food it is while eating it, then spits it out saying it's horrible. He tells her that her dad harvested them, and that he chewed on them daily. She says that he was stubborn, then puts one in her mouth and forces herself to eat it, even though it tastes horrible. She says she wants a glass of the drink too. He tells her that she's underage. She says it doesn't matter, and he told her to do everything she wanted to do. So she won't hold back anymore, since that would be stupid. Then she tells him to give her some. He tells her fine, just one sip. She cheers her glass, then complains about how disgusting it is, saying both the drink and fruit are bad. She looks down, asking if he thinks her dad ate and drank it every day, while protecting the city every day. Taku says that doing what you want without running away is what makes you an adult. She says she doesn't want to be one, and he tells her that's cute. The fire continues to burn, and we see her saying she knew it. That her dad would secretly visit her mother's grave every single night, and while he didn't cry externally, on the inside he must have been ridden with guilt. She says she hates her dad, and she wishes he was still alive, so she could continue to hate him. And so that she could be a bad daughter, so he could yell and scold her. She hates that now she has to be angry alone, and she doesn't like to be mourning alone. She says she misses them, both her mother and father. She begins to cry, and Taku just let her do it in peace. Because in this cruel world the one who continues to persevere the most, the one who must live on and become an adult is Evangeline. The fire continues to burn, until it's small, and Evangeline cried herself to sleep. Taku goes to her parents' graves and puts the bottle of alcohol beside the Count's, then takes a sip, then exhales as the sun begins to rise. As he looked down the road, he could see his soldiers coming toward him. He waves at them, and Lucas sees it, and sighs in relief. Another stage has come to an end. At the temple, Taku is being healed. The saintess tells him he won't be able to use his arm like he used to, and due to the injuries he will have multiple problems. Taku says the price of a fumble is big. It's good that he isn't a fighter. The saintess tells him to rest, and visit the temple every other day to get treated. He thanks her, then asks if Evangeline is okay. The saintess says her injury was quite severe, but she'll be fine if she rests properly. Taku says that her recovery ability is incomparable to his. After the treatment ended, he received a report from Lucas on how the battle went. Within 15 minutes, Damien insta-killed the magic stone golems. And the other golems were wiped out in the remaining 6 hours. Then they rode to Taku once the golems were gone. Taku is surprised they wiped out the golems so easily. Lucas tells him that the party was late, because they were making sure it was clear, then apologizes. Taku says don't be sorry, he did well, then asks about their losses. They have 14 with heavy injuries, and 128 with light injuries. Taku asks about how many are dead, then learns there's none. Taku asks him to repeat. Lucas tells him that there are no deaths. Taku laughs out of relief, since it's the first time they've cleared a stage without deaths. He tells Lucas that's great, saying Lucas is the GOAT. Lucas says that isn't true. Without Taku everyone was on edge without Taku being there. Taku thinks it's because of his skill, the indomitable commander, since it stops those around him from feeling fear and confusion. It just calms them down. He says this just makes them all more dependent on him. He'll need to solve this problem later. Taku tells him the results were good, and he won't run off alone anymore. Lucas tells him to promise him, since he is his bodyguard from when they first met, until now. So don't go anywhere without him. especially when it's dangerous. Taku says he understands, don't worry about it. Then asks about the rest of the party. Lucas says that Damien bled from his eyes, but he's fine and receiving treatment. Taku says that's good, and he'll see him once the treatment is over. But it seems like things have wrapped up nicely. Taku says he should go lay down. At the inner garden of his manor, Taku says spring is approaching. Then he hears Evangeline ask why he doesn't sleep inside, saying he'll get sick like this. He tells her not to treat him like a grandpa. She waddles over and sits beside him. Then says that she didn't think that she would live to see the morning. Taku tells her that he's sorry for making her go through this when she was about to leave. Now she should just rest up until she wants to leave. Evangeline says she doesn't want to leave. She thought about it last night. She wants to inherit her father's position. Taku asks if she understands the weight she'll have to bear, and how her father wanted him to be free so she could live the way she wanted to. She starts to laugh, saying that disobeying him is the last rebellious thing she can do. She wants to understand her father, about how he felt and thought, since she's still confused by his actions. So maybe if she follows his footsteps she'll understand everything he did. The thoughts of her stubborn, honest father. She tells Taku she's sorry, but she truly intends to inherit his title and get the rights to her land back, as the true heir to the Cross family. She plans to take some of Taku's burden, carrying it along with him. He smiles, then she says while it's embarrassing to say she's actually good at fighting, and is top ranked in her class. He says of course since she's an SSR rank. Then Evangeline starts talking about how she'll continue to grow taller, and cooler. She'll continue to grow as a person, as well as a knight. Taku thinks about how she'll become the best tanker in the game. She tells him to say something. He asks what she wants him to say, then she says that they'll fight together, and that she'll protect the city by his side. Taku understands she's asking to join his party, and how there's nobody who would turn the offer down. Taku then tells her no, and she goes to thank him, but is confused because she realized he said no. He tells her the city is his, he cannot give it back. She gives him the WTF face, and he smiles saying if she insists, then he can use her as a knight under his command, to cooperate on protecting the battlefront. When she becomes an adult, and is mature enough to be responsible for the city and continues to help him, then at that time both being the Count and the Lord will be her job. She tells him 3 years, then she will be an adult. And she will get his approval, and take back her position along with the city. Taku tells her he is looking forward to it. He thinks about how the game finished in 3 years, so it won't matter if he gives her the city or not. She sits back down, then asks him again. She says when she was younger her mother told her that she knew if she stayed inside of the city and married her father then sad and difficult things were going to happen. But knowing all of this, she continued to take this path, since she knew that it would continue after. Evangeline asks Taku what he thinks she meant, since she thought she'd understand what her mother meant when she grew up, but that isn't the case. Taku raises his hand up then flicks her on the forehead. She asks what he's doing, and he says if she's asking about what happens after, then it's about the path her parents wanted to continue is still here. He stands up, welcoming her back to the battlefront and starts to walk away, telling her that he'll order her however he wants. She watches him leave, and Taku says that spring is finally here. Evangeline says she understands some of it now. Her mother was determined, and she knew the more you love something the more it hurts to lose it. And the price of her choice could end up being a brutal death, but she chose to get married and have a daughter knowing all this. And she loved both her husband and daughter, and how her father's main reason to fight the monsters was to allow the next generation to continue the connection. And how everyone in this city is living with the same ambition. We then get a nice metaphor with spring and winter, how even when humans die, there is a continuation with the next generation. Now she understands her mother and father a bit more, even if it's a little bit. Her heart felt lighter than it has ever felt. And she's happy spring is finally here. Stage clear. Of course Taku is the MVP. If you've watched till the end, comment Starbucks to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this. Leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.